IB Nation, what's going on? Welcome to the Irish Breakdown Podcast. I am Ryan Roberts, coming to you live here to talk about some defensive line in the present and the future of Notre Dame football.
Offensive.
Oh, what did I? Oh, okay. What? How did that just change? Sorry. How did that happen?
Just keep talking. I'll fix it.
All right. I had it all set up and then it just moved back. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. So we're here to talk about the future, the current of the offensive line for the University of Notre Dame. We're going to talk a little bit about the 2023 season, obviously, the impact that we believe that the current stable of the offensive line room under Coach Harry Hiestand and the development of that room leading to the future for the Fighting Irish, as well as the next step, the next wave, and the future of that offensive line. So we'll be taking a deep dive in that. Of course, we'll hit the mailbag at the end. So if there's any questions, you can hit them anytime. We'll start starring them up. I am Ryan Roberts, of course, Director of Recruiting here at IrishBreakdown.com. That man is Brian Driscoll, the publisher here at IrishBreakdown.com. We're excited to talk about some offensive line play, obviously, because it is assumed to be one of the big strengths for the Notre Dame football team now heading in to the 2023 season. So we're excited to get into that, the mailbag, of course. But we want to start with a little bit of an update, because for people that haven't been following along so far this week, and we did a little bit of a intro into it over the last couple days, the Reese's Senior Bowl 2023 edition has officially kicked off actually on Monday, when players started making their rounds and heading over to the Reese's Senior Bowl, Mobile, Alabama, to get the week kicked off. Early portions are usually comprised of meetings with teams, weigh-ins, general check-ins to the hotel and the facilities, all that great stuff. Yesterday, on Tuesday, Notre Dame got everything kicked off, and I should say the Senior Bowl got everything kicked off on field action. Two members of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish that are a part of the event are defensive end Isaiah Foskey, who is the all-time leading sacker in Notre Dame football history, and Jared Patterson, 4-year starter on the offensive line at center for 3 years and at offensive guard for his final year in 2022. So we wanted to kind of update you all on the first day, the little bit of the action that we saw. I was watching a lot of the film last night and kind of comprising my initial thoughts as far as how the weeks got kicked off, because we talked a little bit yesterday about the weigh-ins and how impactful that could be. Obviously being able to see those body types and to really generate an understanding of what the impact of their upside could be. And I think that really kicked off with Isaiah Foskey, especially on the Monday weigh-in, weighing right around 6'5", 262 pounds, nearly 34-inch arms, 81-inch wingspan. And I really think that what you saw on Monday, it was a big indicator of what you were going to see on yesterday during practice. You saw initially in the one-on-ones, Isaiah had the first rep of the day. He went up against Ryan Hayes, who was the starting left tackle for Michigan, who was playing right tackle on this rep. And immediately what you saw is the things that we laud Isaiah Foskey for having is length, explosiveness, and power. And you saw that on that initial rep. Ryan Hayes got a little bit on his heels. Isaiah Foskey was able to create a lot of speed to power initially in that rep, and he went right down his chest, gave him a little two-hand strike to the middle of his chest, and put it right on his backside, which was a nice way to start the week, to say the least, because one
time, Ryan, you're able to put a guy from Michigan on his butt. That's what
I was going to say.
That's a good start, right? Like,
yeah,
we hear, this great Michigan offensive line, and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, yeah, they're great again in a league that, like the Big Ten, which just has kind of been kind of crap the last couple of years outside of really 3 teams. But it doesn't. I mean, look, the offensive line's been good, right? I'm not trying to say it hasn't, but he wasn't ready for that Isaiah Foskey power, because there aren't really guys like that in the Big Ten this year outside of Ohio State. And even then, there's some talent there, but Foskey's got senior strength, where some of those guys at Ohio State got sophomore strength, right? So that was certainly a good way to put it, Ryan. But just to kind of lead you into the next point, that's the movie kept going to the whole day.
Yes.
And it didn't always work as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's, coming into the week, that's something that we talked about heavily, right? There's no questioning the talent level of Isaiah Foskey, right? Like you are going to lose your mind and kind of drool over, if you're an NFL evaluator, the size, the athleticism that he has. That stuff is easy to see. It doesn't take a good eye or a great scout to look at Isaiah Foskey and say, that's how you draw it up, right? That's what you want a defensive end on the NFL level to look like. And it's easy to get excited about him, obviously. But the things that you wanted to see coming into the week is, yes, Isaiah looks like $1 million, but we know just by watching him over the last couple of years, super productive, but he was winning just basically off of pure power, right? He's got a long arm in his arsenal. He's got the length attributes, and he can convert speed to power pretty well. But when you're going against the best of the best, I mean, you saw him working against guys like DeJuan Jones, for instance, right? And Jalen Duncan from Maryland's there as well, where DeJuan Jones is is much longer than Isaiah Foskey. He's got an extra 8 inches of reach.
Or anyone else.
Exactly. I mean, the longest wingspan in Senior Bowl history was DeJuan Jones, right? So when you're going up against him, and we saw it against Ohio State a little bit in their game, the Notre Dame's game this year, you're not going to win with just length against that guy. You're not going to win against just power because nobody will. That's the guys that he will handle. You have to have moves in the arsenal. And we talked about him working with Brandon Jordan, who's a great pass rush specialist that works with a lot of the top pass rushers in the NFL. And you really want to see Isaiah develop a plan of attack, some secondary moves, whether that is just a club rip, whether that is a ghost move, whether that is some inside counters, whatever it is, you need to see multiplicity to how he rushes the passer, because that on the next level is going to be a difference between being a good football player and reaching his potential. Because I think most people would agree that if Isaiah Foskey hit his potential, he's a potential Pro Bowl player on the NFL level, in my opinion, right? And I think most people understand how talented he is. But during the day, I think you saw a lot of great things. There were a lot of tremendous rushes. There was that upside that you see easy. In the run game, you saw him get extension, use that length. But when he goes against a guy like DeJuan Jones, who was one of the players that everyone, highlighted, you can't just win barreling down his chest. You can't win that way. He's going to be able to counteract that size. He's going to be able to counteract that power. And that's something that you still want to see growth today and tomorrow.
That was the issue on September 4th as well. When they played, is one thing Ohio State has on the edge is length, right? And he just tried to use his length against their even longer length, and it didn't work. I'm going to ask you a question. You watched a lot more of this than I did up to this point, Ryan. Did you see Isaiah Foskey at all with his hand in the ground yesterday?
He was mostly playing from a 2-point stance as a stand-up rusher.
I'm curious about that. Like even in the team stuff I saw, he had his hand up because he had a really nice play. Was it who's the running back from Illinois? Brown, right?
Chase Brown. Yeah.
Chase Brown. He had a great play where Isaiah just blew up a tight end and then makes a tackle, forces the fumble. So he had some of those. But I was curious that there weren't any snaps, at least that I saw, where he had his hand in the ground. It was all stand-up stuff.
He seemed like he was playing a lot more of like a strong side defensive end role too. And because he was working against a lot of tight ends, so he was kind of stand up and just kind of playing down the middle of tight ends and doing that type of stuff, right? Which was interesting. It is very interesting.
I want to see if he can put his hand in the ground. I don't know if I've ever seen Isaiah Foskey put his hand in the ground. And if a team's going to look at him as a strong side end, which honestly probably his best position,
Agreed.
Is a strong side end in a 4-3 or a strong side outside backer in a 3-4 type of look. If you're gonna kind of go to that look. But yeah, I was interested to see that, Ryan. And then Jarrett Patterson also was there yesterday. Ryan, what'd you think of his performance?
I had a lot of mixed opinions on Jared yesterday, and it was a shame, honestly. Well, first and foremost, the thing that I was most interested about, and I think I even texted you about it last night, he had almost no reps at center yesterday. He had a couple centers in the run blocking portion, like the inside run portion of practice, but they had the Oluwatimi guy from Michigan, however you pronounce his last name. He was playing center the bulk of the reps from what I saw on the national side of things. And Jared Patterson was playing between right and left guard, which was just kind of interesting. I actually am looking forward to seeing today and tomorrow if he's going to play a lot more at center, because I still think that's his more natural position. But during the pass rush portion, I thought there was some really good, and then there was some not great. Like that's general. I thought it was a very even split. Like he had a really nice rep during the pass rush 101s with with the kid from Georgia Tech, Keon White, who, I mean, Daniel Jeremiah just had him as like his number 8 player on his big board, which is ridiculous. Don't get me wrong. It's ridiculous that he's that high, but regardless, he's going against a good rusher. They tried to hit him with a push-pull, was able to maintain his base and his balance and just ride him past the pocket. And I was like, that's a nice rep from Jared. And then he was able to go against one of the who was the other rusher? It doesn't really matter, but he was going against a different rusher where he had a really nice initial pop in his hands. I think it was Tyler Lacey from Oklahoma State. He had a nice initial pop, was able to kind of ride him out for a second. Jared's weight got a little too high, right? Like his base got a little too high. So he gave up a little bit of an inside move, but he was still able to counteract Tyler Lacey and shut him down pretty well. So there were a couple really nice reps on pass rush portion of practice. But then there was just a couple other reps where you're like, man, like just move your feet. I think the length thing that we always talk about, Brian, that it doesn't really show up on film, I think it did show up a little bit yesterday because there were some points where a guy would get to his inside shoulder and it just looked like Jared just didn't have a reach, right? Like he just couldn't reestablish leverage, which was unfortunate. But then you go to the run blocking and team portion. I think that's really where Jared struggled the most. You know, I thought there were a lot of upside as far as his pass blocking, which it should be no surprise if you've watched Notre Dame football over the last couple of years. But I really think that he struggled in those team portion of practice. And that can happen at times because there's some miscommunication stuff, right? You're working with new guys, new protections, like that stuff's generally understood. But there were a couple where it was just kind of bending at the waist a little bit, gave up an inside track. Like that stuff was a little
Let me say this to you, Ryan.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about this for a couple of years, and I've always felt like Jarrett Patterson's pass blocking was a tad overrated by the way that it was covered by Pro Football Focus and then by the media, because they'd have this never gave up a sack thing, which I still don't think is accurate because I'm pretty sure I've seen him give up a sack. But one thing Jarrett Patterson was pretty good at is he would actually get beat more than you'd expect, or based on the reputation. But he was really good at staying on.
Yes,
and I think he showed that in the rep against the kid from where's that kid from?
Tyler Lacey from Oklahoma State.
No, not the other kid, the Georgia Tech kid.
Oh,
when
Keon
he
White.
Against him.
Yeah,
he was kind of got beat for a second, but was able to get hands on. I think that's something that Jarrett's really, really good at and really effective at. And I think there are some things that I think he'll need to work on as a guard that'll help his pass pro that I thought he showed me a little bit yesterday from a foot quickness standpoint. It's just, as you said, the pad level was inconsistent. And I think that was a bit of an issue for him at times this year, guard early. And then as the season wore on, he got better and better and better. And it looked like that was kind of what we saw on yesterday is, again, it was just kind of getting back to that pad level, getting high. Because I think that's the big transition he made from center to guard. At center, there's a natural pad level you have to play with because of the manner in which you snap the ball. You're going to have to, sink your hips and do that. Where at guard, you kind of immediately kind of go up. And I think that's something that we'll see eventually work out of him if he does stay a guard, if teams want to keep him a guard. I do think that. So it didn't concern me a whole lot, to be honest with you, because I think it's fixable, but you were hoping some of it would have been fixed by now. And it got better as the season went on working with Harry Heastan. It got better and better and better. But I think it was kind of just reverting to some bad habits. And I think that can happen when you're your first day back of going against live competition and the speed is ramped up and you're not in drills anymore. I'm curious to see if he settles in as the week goes on. But I agree with you. From what I saw, he didn't have a bad day, but he didn't have a great day either. He just was a little up and down.
And that's why scouts really care more about what day 2, day 3 look like, right? Because to your point, there's going to be some miscommunication stuff. There's going to be some rustiness wearing off for guys that haven't played in a little while. Like those things are naturally going to happen, right? I think that you make a great point because I don't think there was a rep all day, right? I didn't think Jared Patterson got into good initial position, right? Like I thought he was in good initial position, gaining leverage. Like that play against Tyler Lacey in pass protection was one where I was like, that was great initial quickness out of his stance. That was a good punch. It was just finishing reps yesterday, I think, was the thing that he struggled with most. And hey, as long as you get into a proper position, we can work with that, right? We can work with running your feet a little better on contact. We can work on finishing plays. That stuff can happen. I mean, there was a play in the run portion of practice where I think he may have even pulled in this situation, and he fitted the guy really well. He got inside the butt, it was a good pad level. Everything was good. And then he just stopped running his feet a little bit, right? So then he starts to lunge, and that's kind of where he loses his leverage in those situations. So I think you saw a good start. I just think that he needs to finish better, more on day 2 and day 3. So it's not an indictment at all, because again, you're getting put in a situation where it's a little bit sink or swim, because people want to isolate your abilities as a football player. They want to see you in one-on-one opportunities a ton in this week and see how you can flourish or how you fall to the wayside. And I think that Jared showed some good signs. It's just more about finishing for the rest of the week, in my opinion.
I know the play you're talking about, Ryan, it was like a kick-out block. It was like a really quick pull, and I was like, man, he got over there quick. He got under his pads and had a nice pop, and you're like, that's an impressive rep. But then, as you mentioned, he just didn't finish it, and that's going to be the thing. So,
I thought he really just generally moved really well yesterday too. They used him to pull a lot, and I was like, he looks smooth, man. He looks like because I think that there's this perception about Jared Patterson that he's not a good athlete, which I've never understood. I think he's a really nice athlete on the interior, and I think he did showcase that yesterday. Again, it's just about the power elements of his game, because he did come in a little lighter too, Brian. I think he was what was he, like 308 during the season or something like that. I think he was like 303, 304. So he lost a little bit of weight too. So that's gonna be something that people are going to talk about.
So that's going to do it for our wrap up of the Senior Bowl. We'll have another one tomorrow. Ryan will get back into watching day 2, and it is nice not having to, I'm dealing with taxes and paying people. It's always the first of the men's stuff. So I was like, you know what, Ryan's got this today. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. So Ryan, that's going to kind of do it for the Senior Bowl stuff. We're going to move on to the offensive line next, but before we do, just a quick like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell and share this podcast, folks. We appreciate that very, very much. So let's move on to the offensive line, Ryan. Very I mean, it's interesting what a year can do. And it just goes to show that technique does matter. Coaching does matter in a big way. And I'm not saying that flippantly or disrespectfully.
Sure.
But we saw that this year, the offensive line. We're basically the same guys that played last year. Some were a year older. But you saw guys that struggled the year before, were young the year before, really come out. And it was a line that, in my opinion, was still inconsistent. Part of that was just the unit really, sometimes they didn't play well every single week. I thought I thought at times a lot of it was just because of the nature of the offense and just the way that it was called or designed. You didn't have much of a passing threat, all those type of things. Wasn't super, super consistent, but man, it was really good for a big chunk of the year. And it was a really big step forward, and just kind of big picture, Ryan, you feel like, okay, that ship has been righted. It's going to keep getting better. The ship has been righted. The position that's supposed to be your strength that wasn't really for 3 of the previous 4 years is back on track. And I feel, for me, I'm not going to speak for everybody else, for me, that's a big reason why I have a lot more optimism about the offense heading into 2022. Is you look at the front 7 of the defense, I have a lot of questions about the coaching, right? When it's not talent, it's the coaching, whether it's linebacker coaching, D-line coaching. When I look at Notre Dame and I look up the middle and it's the running backs and the offensive line, the talent is also very good. I would argue slightly better than it's better than the defensive side as well, but it's more faith in the coaching. And I think that optimism, that excitement, that confidence is why I have a lot more faith that this offense is going to be a lot better next year, because that part of the ball is going to, you feel like, is going to shine. Like, it was good. It was really good this year. Should have been a Joe Moore Award semifinalist, which is like the top 10. Should have been in that group. No question about it. Next year, you expect it to be one of the top 3 or 4, if not the best line in the country, because there's tons of talent coming back, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But at the baseline, and this is how we kick off all these shows, Ryan, I'm confident this line is going to continue to get better, because I feel like they're back in a position where you have someone that knows how to develop these kids, push these kids, kick them in the pants when they need to, and get the most out of them. And then when you combine that with the talent, Ryan, you say, okay, this is going to be a lot of fun over the next little bit.
It's funny that we're doing the offensive line right after our cornerback conversation yesterday, because I feel like a lot of the same things that give us so much optimism about the cornerback group is the same in the offensive line. And I think that we started this podcast obviously the same as yesterday. It's that we don't have to keep reciting the resume of Harry Heastand to be like, hey guys, you're in a pretty good pretty good spot here, right? I mean, I'm going to, because that's what we're going to do, right? But the guys, the Zach Martins of the world, the Ronnie Stanleys, the Quentin Nelsons, the Mike McGlincheys, like those names resonate with Notre Dame fans for good reason, because the best of what the offensive line has been for Notre Dame over the last X amount of years has been in large due to what Harry Heastand has done from an evaluation, identification perspective, bringing players to fit what he wants to do, come in and develop them into not good offensive linemen. Most of the time into great offensive linemen, into NFL caliber offensive linemen, into Pro Bowl level offensive linemen in a lot of instances, right? So you look at the development that is happening in that room, it all starts with Harry Heastand, right? And that's why you feel so optimistic, because if Harry Heastand isn't the best offensive line coach in the country, he's what, top 2 or 3? I mean, like, I don't even think it's much of a conversation piece with the track record he has, with the resume that he has, on top of the fact that, hey, Chris Watt's in the room too, and he's pretty dang good too, right? Like he's done a pretty nice job with the role that he's had with Notre Dame, and even a couple other places at this point, right? When he was with Tulane. So I think that you're looking at a guy like Harry Heastand up top with his main man next to him and Chris Watt that has been through his tutelage, has learned directly from him, has been coached by him, understands what Harry wants. I think that is almost a dynamic duo in a sense, but it all starts with Harry, of course, because he has developed a reputation as arguably the best in the business.
I mean, we can get into is he 1, 2, or 3, and different people will have different opinions on that. Different offensive line analysts will have different opinions on it. There's a lot of good offensive line coaches in the business, and there's a few that, to me, are at the very, very top. And there's no question that Harry Heastand's at the very top of that conversation. If there's like we're doing top 5 without order, he's in there. And there's going to be a lot of people that will say he's the best. It really doesn't matter. It's about, do you have an elite guy doing it? And they do. And I think last year answered a question, Ryan. There was two big questions about last year. Number one, and I'm talking about the coaching aspect of it. Number one is players have changed a little bit in a very short period of time. We as a society, as a media, as just a way that it's portrayed, we're babying kids a lot more as football players than we were even 5-6 years ago, right? Kids are softer. You got to be nice to them. And look, I'm one of those people who says, like, look, I would look back at my coaching career and some of the ways that I went off and how I used fear as a way to coach. And I have regrets about it, right? But at the same time, it's like, because there's a lot of things about it just for me personally. But there's this notion of, will that way of coaching work nowadays? I think there's a very valid question mark about whether or not that transition would work. Would Harry Heastand still be able to be Harry Heastand and it be received by these players? And it was. By all accounts, it was. And it was perceived by the kids you were most concerned about. Would Jarrett Patterson buy in as the veteran? And would Blake Fisher and Joe Walt buy in as the young studs? And it was received by all. And so I think that's a big thing for me. That was a big question mark. Would his way work with younger people nowadays? And it did. And it just goes to show that, maybe kids aren't as soft as we make them out to be, or we allow them to be, right? And there's a lot of kids out there that want that tough love, that want that coaching, as long as they feel you're invested in them as people. And that's never been a question mark with Harry Heastand. The second part of it too was, guy hasn't coached in 3-4 years. Would he be rusty? Would he be able to? And I think for a little bit, maybe there was. That's why the O-line didn't start off quite as well, but they got rolling pretty quickly. So I think any questions about, is he still kind of in it? Does he still have the fire in his belly? Will the young kids relate to him? I think all those things were answered and positively. So now you feel like, okay, now it's just about him getting more and more out of these young people. And that's what gets me fired up about it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's said very well, because I do think that there's that assumption about how hard you can coach a player now. But I think that you hit on it perfectly. Harry Heastand isn't tough just to be tough and to exert his will on people, right? He's there to show that he cares and he wants the best out of them.
Right.
I mean, you told a story about Steve Elmer, right? Where it's like, I didn't like Harry when I played as much because I didn't understand.
That came from Malik and them. Malik Zaire and Sean Davis talked about that on the Lucky Lefty podcast. Well, I do know Liam Eichenberg was that way. He didn't necessarily care for Coach Easton very early in his career either. And then by the time he was a fifth-year senior, he's working out over the summer with Coach Easton trying to get better, right? And I think that's kind of – but that's not I mean, there's been a lot of kids like that. Like, because it's different, right? It's different. And part of the reason he does it is like, look, I'm trying to create toughness here. This is a unique position. This isn't quarterback. This isn't receivers. This isn't corners. This is a unique position that requires a level of physical and mental toughness. If you think about what offensive linemen do, like if you did the stuff that offensive linemen do, like out in the street, out in public, you'd go to jail. I mean, you can't do those things, right? And they're asked to do that every single snap. And it's also about, I'm trying to make you tougher. I'm trying to make you stronger. I'm trying to challenge you to where the Saturday, that's the easy part. Saturday's easy because I have gotten on you and ridden you and demanded perfection in a way that Saturday's the easy part. And if you ever notice, Harry Heastan doesn't really go off a lot on Saturdays. You kind of see him there, like if you make a big mistake, he'll get on you. But it's the Monday to Friday where that happens. But would the kids take it or not? You know, it seems like they have. And he went out and recruited a pretty darn good recruiting class as well. So, you know, Ryan, I think those are all questions that needed to be answered. And you hope, like this is me in my head. I don't know if I don't have sources that tell me this is accurate or not. But just kind of in my head, I just have this line of succession thing in my head where, you know, Coach Eastan's going to be here until he's ready to retire. And then he retires. It's like, okay, Chris Watt, now it's your turn to do this whole thing. Right. You know, and I think because to your point, when you're a guy like Harry Heastan and you've got 18 kids on scholarship at offensive line, you're not going to be able to coach all 18 of those kids if you don't have a GA or somebody that you trust to work with them. And that's what you have in Chris Watt, is someone who played under Harry Heastan. So just because you've embraced the hardness doesn't mean you always like it. Sure. Or want to hear it. But then you have a guy that's been there and has been on the receiving end of some of those. And if you've ever seen Chris Watt, he's a pretty mild-mannered guy. And I think it's a nice contrast to what Harry Heastan brings. And I think they're a really good 1-2 punch. And I think that adds value to what they're going to be. So then it says, okay, well, now the bar's been raised, Ryan, right? And that's the thing about the offensive line heading into 2023 is the bar's been raised now. Okay, sure. You've got that other stuff in the rear view. Bar's been raised. Now it's time to go out and say, okay, we're going to take this thing to another level. And that's the expectation, right? The expectation is, okay, you got them back on track. Now it's time to take it to the next level. And that's now the question mark for 2023 is, okay, he got them back on track to a level where they're one of the 10 best offensive lines in the country, in my view. Okay, now can you take it to that next level? And that's what we're going to find out moving forward. And then can you continue to recruit the way where you're adding, good players and things like that? So far, so good. But that's still a little bit of a question mark because I do feel like, just 1 year isn't going to answer that. And in a year where it was a very good offensive line, 1 through 5, but they did have some misses at the top, right? I mean, They did miss some of the top guys on the board. Will they be able to, hit the top guys on the board again this year? Or are they going to have to then expand the board and find the Joe Waddings and the Christopher Terricks and maybe those next level guys in the 2024 class? So I think that's another question mark. And as we look into the sort of the coaching the future is, he's got a Peter Jones. Can he land the Gearby Lambert? Can he land a Caleb Brewer? Can he get those top of the level? I'm not talking about what the national rankings are. I'm talking about who Notre Dame's top of the board guys were. Yeah. Right. So I'm not talking about Samson Okunlola. I'm talking about, you didn't get Monroe Freely. Mm-hmm. You missed on that one. There were some guys that you had on your board that you liked. Elijah Page ends up going somewhere else, right? There's those kind of guys that you liked that you ended up not getting. Now, you still got a lot of guys you love, but is there another level that he's going to get to? That's what we're going to find out. And, I think that's also part of just how good this line can be. And again, when I talk about this, Ryan, we're not talking about recruiting rankings. We're talking about guys that the Notre Dame staff that Harry Heastan views as his top targets. Because I can point to a long list of players that Harry Heastan coached that were elite players that were not elite prospects. I mean, I mean, do we need to get into where Mike McGlinchey was ranked again? Do we need to get into where Ronnie Stanley was ranked? Now, in fairness, Ronnie Stanley was being recruited before Harry Hiestand was hired. But the point is that he coached him to that degree, right? Sure. And do we need to talk about, where Zach Martin was as a player? Again, not recruited by Harry Hiestand, but coached in his last couple years by Harry Hiestand. And on and on and on. Now, there were highly ranked guys. Robert Hainsey was highly ranked. Tommy Kramer was highly ranked. Liam Eichenberg was highly ranked. The point is, some of those guys may be highly ranked by the services. Some won't. It doesn't matter. This is about what Harry Hiestand thinks about these guys. And that's going to be the key, is if he can land those guys. And we'll find out. We'll find out. Yeah. I think the 2024 class, if he can, because the board is so small, if he can strike it big with his top targets in 2024, then we'll say, okay, he's figured it out. Because you're going to start seeing the NFL draft success happen real quick, and then it's going to be easy for Harry. It's like, I want that guy, I want that guy, I want that guy, which is basically what he was doing his last couple of years in Notre Dame, if we're being honest about it.
Yep. I mean, it's a great note, and I would say that the 2023 class that Notre Dame just signed from the offensive line perspective, I think it's exactly the type of kid that Harry wants, right? And you mentioned this already with how the offensive line kind of assimilated to Harry's personality and got maybe a little more physically tough, a little more demanding of their regimen and all that great stuff, something that we hadn't seen. I mean, Notre Dame was they were a little bit more of a finesse offensive line before Harry Hiestand got there, and they turned quickly into much more of a physical brand in 2022. But I think for the 2023 recruiting class, I mean, from Charles Jagasaw to Sullivan Absher to Sam Pendleton to Joe Otting to all the way down to Christopher Tarrick in no order, they're all physical dudes, right? Like, there's no questioning. Like, those, I mean, you could have a really nice highlight tape of just pancakes all day with those types of guys. They all play a mean brand of football. So I liked that element of it. And I will also say this, Brian, is that for Harry, with how he develops, I'm also okay with him taking a Joe Otting, right? Because you think long-term, you can hit it, right? Because you trust him more. If there are some coaches that if all they're getting are projects or guys that are maybe year 3 players comparative to year 1 or year 2 players, then you start getting a little nervous because you don't know if they're going to be developed properly. Like, we're seeing what the defensive line group was in 2023, for instance, right? Like, can Boubacar Traore, Brennan Vernon, can those guys hit that ceiling? I think that's a question that we need to work through. For Harry Hiestand, I have less of a question on that. But you're absolutely correct in the sense that you got Charles Jagasaw, but you were in a good spot with Charles when Harry got on board, right? Like, that was a guy that you should have gotten. Getting Gerby Lamberts, getting Caleb Brewer, getting those types of athletes on the offensive line in 2024 is going to be a big indication, because if you get that talent level with a guy like Harry after a couple years with him, you feel really good about the fortunes of Notre Dame football, not even counting the simple fact that, yes, you're about to start that pipeline in the NFL again very shortly, right? Because Joe Alt's going to be a high draft pick next year. Blake Fisher's probably going to be a high draft pick next year or the year after, whenever he comes out. And then the pipeline will begin for the Charles Jagasaws of the future, Emil Wagner's possibly, Billy Strauss. Like, there's a lot of talent in that room. So the one thing I did like about where Harry was when he came in, though, Brian, in my opinion, is we've talked in nauseam about Jeff Quinn's shortcomings as a offensive line developer, right? We've talked about that. But I would say this is that the room was pretty well stocked with talents for Harry when he first came in, right? So Jeff Quinn did a good job of getting the Blake Fishers, the Joe Alts, like identifying some key talent. And now it's Harry's to mold, and I think you feel really good about the future of the offensive line, obviously, for that fact.
Well, I think that's the thing, too, is there's credit that belongs to Tommy Rees. There's credit belongs to Jeff Quinn and the people that were part of the staff that got those offensive linemen, because he did recruit Joe Alt. And look, here's the thing about like Joe Alt is I remember when he committed, I loved that pickup. And it was not a plan B pickup, right? This wasn't where Jeff Quinn lost a couple top targets, and like there were some mistakes I thought Jeff Quinn made in that class, but that Joe Alt was a guy that they identified early and went out and got. Some of the other guys were no-brainers. I mean, Blake Fisher was a no-brainer, but Tommy Rees went out and got Billy Strauss, right? I mean, Jeff Quinn went out and got Ty Chance, turned into is a guy that I think is going to compete for starting job this spring, or at least potentially could. So now some of the guys on the roster, Harry Hiestand recruited. I mean, if we're being honest, I mean, Zeke Correll is the guy that Harry Hiestand recruited. Now he recommitted. I mean, he committed to Notre Dame after he left, but he said Notre Dame was my number one until Coach Hiestand left. Right, Andrew Kristofik's another one. So I mean, there has been a Harry Hiestand influence on this group. up to this point in time. So, but he did inherit a pretty darn good roster. I mean, there's a chance that only one guy starting next year was recruited by Harry Hiestand. And so that's where you want to be. Now, the one thing that Harry Hiestand has shown in the past is he inherited some pretty talented kids early in his tenure as well. He inherited in 2012, he inherited Zach Martin and Chris Swat and Christian Lombard before the injuries. He inherited Ronnie Stanley to a degree because Ronnie was being recruited by Notre Dame, and then obviously they came in and were able to close the deal on it. But he inherited Braxton Cave and those guys. But then he showed that I can then go out and get my own guys.
Sure.
His first full recruiting class was Mike McGlinchey, Steve Elmer, Hunter Biven, Colin McGovern, John Montel. It's his second full recruiting class. And this is the thing that kind of say if history repeats itself, his 2013 class was pretty good, had some high upside guys, but really only Elmer was really the only really highly ranked one by everybody. Montelis was ranked high by one service. Biven was ranked high by a couple. But it wasn't necessarily, huge pickups, the way that like a Charles Jagasol is, right? So kind of similar to this year's class, although that class was ranked a tad higher individually. But then you look at it and say the next year was the one that was really dynamic. That was the Quentin Nelson, Alex Barr, Sam Mustipher, Jimmy Byrne class. So the second was even better than the first one. And so you hope that history repeats itself. And that's what they're shooting for in this class. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. So,
yeah,
I'm just laughing at some of the comments. People are questioning why Notre Dame didn't go after a certain recruit because he was ranked high by the services. I guess I'll have to trust Harry Hiestand on this one. Like, that should not be a guess, everybody. I mean, you know what I mean? Like that shouldn't be a guess. Okay, if Notre Dame didn't recruit an in-state kid, I don't care how he was ranked. You darn better believe that they did their homework on him and said, no, doesn't really fit what we do. I'm sorry.
I know who you're talking about now. I wasn't looking at the chat. I know who you're talking about now.
So all good. Yeah. Anyway, Ryan, let's move on to sort of the present, and then we'll kind of get in the future of the offensive line.
Sure.
The reality is that for this team to reach its potential, we need to see the tackles become stars. And for Joe Walt, that means kind of keep doing what you're doing, right? And get a little better in the run game, which is going to happen just by your natural growth, right? He was a true sophomore last year. It's true. He'd be a little bit stronger. His technique is sound. And I actually thought Joe Walt got a lot better late in the year in the run game than he did a pass game. I actually thought the South Carolina game was probably I use quotations, his worst pass pro game, because he never had a bad pass pro game, but that was probably his worst one. But I also thought it was one of his best run blocking games of the season for Joe Walt. And so to me, there's another level for him, but the big one's going to be Blake Fisher. Can you get Blake Fisher to go from being a pretty good player at times, but an inconsistent player, which you'd expect from a sophomore who missed all but 2 games of his freshman year? Can you get him to now go from that to now has the breakout? Now he becomes an All-American kind of player. I think getting those bookends is going to be really key for Notre Dame to kind of take that step from really good to elite, because they were not an elite offensive line this year, Ryan. They weren't. No. They were really good. They weren't elite. The step is to get to them to be elite. And I think that it has to start with your stars have to be stars. And that's going to be the key, is getting both of the tackles to come out and be dominant players.
Well, and I think that there's, again, it's not a misnomer, because Joe Walt was an All-American last year, right? He was a really good football player, obviously. He was arguably the top left tackle in football this past year. But I think one thing that people don't quite understand is that he could still get better, man. He's not near to his ceiling. Like, I think that there's this assumption, because Blake Fisher's so talented, that Joe Walt is close to his ceiling. No, I don't think that's true at all. I don't think it's true at all.
I think here's why I think people think that, Ryan, is because I think he's close to his ceiling from a technical standpoint.
That's fair.
I don't think Joe Walt's has a lot of, you got to really work on this technical thing. He showed up as a pretty technically sound offensive lineman and has only gotten more technically sound. There's just not a lot of technical aspects in this game to improve upon. I think the point you're making, and I want to hammer this specifically, is Joe Walt has not reached his physical peak yet. That's when he will become the player he's really capable of. And that's kind of what I was referring to is with the run blocking. I don't have any beef with Joe Walt's run blocking. He surprisingly plays with great pad level for a kid who's almost 6'8". and in the run game. I mean, that has always been kind of my big concern. Him is he going to be able to get low enough to be able to play with power in the run game? And for a 6'8" kid, he plays with great pad level and a great base.
Yep, he's got good bands.
As you mentioned, he's now going to have 3 years of weight room under his belt going into this year. He's going to have now a full year, extra year of Harry Hiestand coaching him up under his belt. And that's where you start getting excited about, okay, that's where a big jump could be coming for Joe Alt, is the physical strength that will come from just more time in the weight room, which then makes him an even more dominant player. So I think that's where the jump can and should be for Joe Alt in year 3, in my opinion.
Well, I think because of this, Brian, how much weight did he get? I mean, how much did he weigh when he was a senior? He was what, the 260-ish, something like that,
yeah,
right?
260, 270.
Yeah. So, I mean, he was a light kid, obviously, and he shows up to Notre Dame at 300 pounds, right? So you're like, oh, that's a lot of weight in a short amount of time. It was obviously good weight, and then he got up to about 316 pounds, I think is what he was listed at this year, 317, somewhere in that ballpark. But I think what people miss with that is, yes, he's adding good weight. He's getting stronger. But when you add weight that quickly, sometimes the strength profile is still a little behind that, right? It's still coming. It's still maturing. So I think that there's a power profile that Joe Alt has not even touched yet, on top of the fact that, hey, he's a former high school tight end, right? Quarterback, whatever. Like, he was a skill position player. And he's
a tight end.
He has that natural foot quickness. He's got that natural flexibility. He's a good athlete, right? Like, no one has any doubts about that. The power profile, I think, is coming. I think it's already showing itself. But in year 3 under Matt Bayless, I have big expectations that he's going to go from a good run blocker to a dominant one. I think that he can make that type of jump. And if he does, then we're talking about top 10 overall draft pick in 2024, if he enters the draft. Like, that's a lock. Because already he has the athleticism, the length, the foot quickness, all that great stuff. If you add the power profile in, then where's the hole, right? Like, where's the hole in his game? He doesn't really have one at that point. But I think that we just need to understand Joe Alt, the 2022 version of Joe Alt, is not the best Joe Alt we're going to see. That's not. And that not even for next year, for the future of the NFL, all that great stuff. He's got room to grow, and he is going to be a dominant player because of it, in my opinion. And I think that we were talking about Blake Fisher. He is the ultimate litmus test for how good Harry Hiestand still is, right? Because if you look at that player, with Blake buying into what Coach Hiestand is selling him, the year 2 jump, I think, is going to be just insane. I think he's going to take a massive, massive jump in 2023, potentially.
Because he's the player that has the technical improvement that's needed.
Yes.
There's a lot of technical improvement that Blake needs that Joe didn't need. And we've talked about why. I mean, Joe's dad was an all-pro NFL offensive lineman, right? I mean, he's been taught that. Blake Fisher's parents did a great job of teaching him to be a respectful young man and a good kid and a hard worker and all the things that he is. I mean, there's nobody that I see involved in the community more than Blake. I mean, he's constantly doing stuff in the community, right? So, because that's who they are. They're not former NFL, people. And so Blake has a lot more room for improvement from a technical standpoint. And that's where you start getting excited about it. Because when Blake was on last year, I'll put it like this. His 10 most dominant plays were more impressive than Joe Alt's 10 most dominant plays from just a sheer, I'm kicking your freaking butt standpoint.
Especially in the run game. Yeah.
Exactly. Because he's so big and so strong. But he needs the technical improvement. But there's still also going to be, Blake's going to still get stronger too, because he was just a sophomore last year. I mean, you look at him in the face last year, he still looks like a teenager, because he is, right? And so that's where you start getting a little fired up. Boy, this kid's got a chance to really take that next jump and be a dominant player, where you've got the technician on the left side and there's just the bully on the right side, and you start feeling really good about your duo there.
Well, I mean, if I could just add one last thing, it's like Blake Fisher has about as much upside, in my opinion, as any offensive lineman in college football. Like, he has that type of upside. Has he gotten to there yet? Absolutely not. He was a good to very good player at times in 2022. But I think the exciting part is that even if he's just the same player, he's a really good football player. But if he hits near his ceiling, then he's going to be a dominant player. And I think that there is a legitimate chance. And again, I'm not going to predict this because Joe Alt's an All-American, right? But I do think that there's a legitimate chance, Brian, that during the 2023 season or right at the end of it, we could be having a conversation of who was a better offensive lineman on this team, Blake Fisher or Joel. I think it's possible. It's possible. Am I going to predict it? No, because Joe's just at a little bit of a different tier than Blake right now. But Blake has enough talent to cut that gap pretty quick, in my opinion.
Let me change your statement a bit, if I can.
Yes, of course.
I don't think the discussion will be who's better, because I think it's going to be Joe, because of just he's the left tackle, he's all those different things. I think the question will be who's more dominant.
Sure.
I think that's more of what I look for, because it's hard for me to envision any offensive lineman being as steady and consistent as Joe Walt. I didn't see one. And look, I didn't watch as much Peter Skoronski as I did of Joe Walt, but even when I did watch him, Peter Skoronski was really good. Really good. But even he wasn't quite as consistent. He'd have a couple reps where he maybe got beat off the edge, where you'd go through whole games, you're like, I don't know if Joe Walt got beat once that game or had one bad stance, because he's so long.
I was going to say he's equally as talented as he is technical too, right? He's 6'7" with long arms. Peter Skoronski's 6'4.5" with shorter arms. Like, he needs to be technically perfect to be very good.
Right. And so just the consistency in which he does his job is really impressive. Where I think Blake is going to take a jump next year, Ryan, is there's going to be stretches where you're like, in that game, Blake was better. In that game, Blake was better. But Blake still has to, he still has to show me, there's not a lot of the up and downs. He's got to get rid of the up and downs, which comes from experience. But I think the question about who's the more dominant player is definitely going to be part of the conversation next year, in my opinion. No doubt about it. And it's a good place to be.
Yes.
End of the day, though, Ryan, you could have the best bookend tackles in the country, but you got to be good up the middle. And I think the best job that Harry Hiestand did coaching this year was not Blake Fisher, was not Joe Walt, was not anybody else. It was Zeke Correll, and it's not even close. Because Zeke Correll is a kid that is in 2021 was struggled mightily, and that's being nice. And eventually got benched and replaced by Andrew Kristofik. Comes out this spring and performs so well that Notre Dame decided to move their All-American caliber 3-year starting center out to guard. And early on, if we're being honest, Zeke didn't play as poorly early on as he did in 2021, but he didn't play great. By about the third game, you looked at it and said, okay, this is what they saw. And he was pretty good the rest of the year. And the thing that impressed me, Ryan, too, was there were snaps at times this year where he would actually get knocked off the ball. Now, that's got to change. You've got to not get knocked back the way that he did at times. But I was really impressed by Zeke's ability even to stay in front of defensive linemen as they were pushing him back. And then he would be able to anchor and recover. And a couple times, Ryan, he got pushed back. He anchored and then drove the guy back. Now, that's impressive. That's strength, that's fight, but that's also being sound fundamentally. Yep. And so he was able to recover so those things. So I actually think Zeke, even though he'll be a fifth-year senior next year, has a lot of room for improvement technically, which is kind of what has me excited because, look, Zeke Correll's going to work, right? That's never been a question. So you look and say, boy, if he could get him from here to here in year 1 to year 2 or year 0 to year 1, there's another jump for him in year 2. Will the jump be as great as it was last year? No, because if he makes the same level of improvement from 2021 to 22 into 23, he's going to be the best center in college football because he made a big jump, right? And I don't think that usually the year 2 is not the same jump when you're talking about a veteran player, because we're not talking about the guy that's a rising junior or something like that. He's going to be a fifth-year senior next year. But if he can become more technically consistent, Zeke's going to have a really good year for Notre Dame. And the encouraging thing is, because of COVID, Zeke actually still has 2 years left to start, which I hope he takes advantage of, because then you get him 3 full years under Harry Hiestand. Zeke Correll's an NFL football player. He may be one next year, but I'm encouraged to see the growth he made, Ryan. But he's got to make another jump this year at center and be more consistent. He had, and there was, there was a game late he really struggled. I don't know if it was Navy or USC. I can't remember which one, but he had a rough game.
I feel like most of the interior offensive line played not great against Navy, if I remember correctly. Right?
It could have been that one, but but for the most part, he was pretty good last season after the first couple games. And if he can just make a nice, steady year 2 starter growth, then you feel like, boy, you're going to be good up the middle, because you can have great tackles, Ryan, but if you're not strong up the middle, your offense is not going to be able to reach its full potential. Not against the teams Notre Dame plays. If you don't have a good, if Notre Dame's offensive tackles dominate Ohio State's defensive ends, it won't matter if you're getting your butt kicked up the middle, and they're going to have some dudes up the middle too. So to really be that elite line, Ryan, the interior's got to be great, and it's got to start with Zeke at center, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I mean, against Ohio State, that's a perfect conversation, right? Because the defensive ends weren't really what messed up Notre Dame in that game. Was it Marcus Hall? Was he the guy that had the 2 sacks?
It's Mike Hall, right?
Michael Hall, yeah. Yeah. He was the guy that had a little bit of interior pressure in that game. He's the one that had the pressure mostly.
And even when they weren't getting the pressure, they were occupying the interior guys so much that they just couldn't get off to Tommy Eichenberg on his delayed blitzes. They just couldn't come off of those blocks to get to him, and that's what kicked their butt. It wasn't Sawyer and JT and the other guys. It was right up the middle is where Ohio State kicked their butt.
Yep.
And so again, Ryan, you talk about it, is that's something that has to get better. You have to get better, and it has to start at center. If the center is not really good, it makes it harder for your guards to be to their full level, because they got to protect the center. That should not be an issue for Notre Dame's guards next season, in my opinion, because you expect Zeke Corral to be really good, in my view.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the one thing that's lost with Zeke is that this is going to be his second full year as a starting center, right? Like, he started a couple games a couple years ago at center out of necessity with Jared Patterson getting injured, obviously. Then he plays guard the whole year, doesn't play center. I mean, this is his second year as a starting center.
He got hurt. Like, he actually played well in his 2 games as a starter. He played against North Carolina, then got hurt, and then played against Bama. But he got hurt, so he missed that development time. And that had been an issue for Zeke in the past, as well, as he just got banged up a lot. And he was healthy. I mean, as healthy as an offensive lineman can be going through a full season. But that was a big key for Zeke, too, is he was able to answer the bell every week. I do think developing depth behind him is going to be a very important thing this season, because there was a big question mark that if he got hurt, what would happen? And that's still, to me, a big question mark about this team, is who's going to step in if Zeke does go down, in my view. Or let's say Zeke has a great year and he goes pro after his 5th year. Who's that next guy? That's going to be a big question mark. Guard is also a very big question mark, Ryan. The good thing, question mark in regard to, we don't know who it's going to be.
Sure.
But I have to admit, it's just not a position I probably should be more worried about it than I am, to be honest with you. Because whoever steps into those guard spots are not going to have much experience at all outside of Andrew Kristofic. I mean, there's not a lot of guys really that I view as being in contention for those jobs that's played much ball besides Andrew Kristofic. So Billy Schrouth, elite talent, played 3? I don't actually know if he even played at all last year. Maybe 3 snaps against Boston College. Maybe. I'm actually going to look that up right now to see how much he played. But that's the thing for me, Ryan, is I need to see those guys play. Billy Schrouth did not play last year. He didn't play any snaps last year. So I believe that is correct. Let me just look that up. Yeah, no snaps last year. Rocco Spindler played 3. Michael Carmody played 3. Now, he played a lot the year before. Ty Chan didn't play any snaps last year. So you could go into the season potentially with your 2 starting guards as guys who didn't play any snaps last year, because Notre Dame just struggled to blow people out. But for some reason, Ryan, I'm just confident. Like, look, Andrew Kristofic if Andrew Kristofic starting at guard next year, okay, cool. I'm fine. I'm good with that. If he gets beat out, it means the guy that beat him out was pretty good.
Yep.
Right. Same thing with the other guard spot. It's young. There's not a lot of experience, but you look at the experience that they're going to have on both sides of whoever's a guard. They're going to have a lot of experience at tackle and a lot of experience at center, no matter what side you're on. And there's a lot of size and a lot of talent. And that's the other thing too, is they're going to be thicker and stronger, in my opinion, next year than they were this past year, where Jared Patterson was kind of a pumped up 308, right? Like, I don't think he's a natural 310-pound guy. Josh Lugg was at like 316, but he's a slender 316, right? He's not a real massive guy, right?
Because he's tall. He's really tall.
He's tall.
Yeah.
And because he's tall, he can, his 315 is like, maybe 302 for a guy that's 6'3" or something like that, right? But you're talking about with Billy Schrouth, who's going to be every bit of 310 plus. You're talking about Ty Chan, who's probably going to be close to 315, 320 next year.
It's a big kid.
Right. Andrew Kristofic's over 300 pounds. He's a lot like Patterson. He's not a natural 310 plus pound guy, so he won't be there. But man, a lot of the kids are going to be battling for that job. Charles Jagasol is going to, not in the spring, but by the fall is a guy to keep an eye on. He's going to be 320 some pounds when he shows up. So there's a chance for this line to get even bigger next year. It'll be younger, but it's a chance to get even bigger. And I think how that group develops is going to ultimately determine just how good next level this line can be. Whether it's a top 5 line or the best line is going to largely be determined to me by the guards moving forward.
And we talked about cornerback yesterday, that it's a happy marriage, right? Between great developer and great talents, right? You need both in order for it to be an elite level group. And I think that's what gives you so much optimism about the guard spots, to your point, Brian, is that there is some uncertainty on who those guys are. What is that starting combination going to be? But you feel good about it because, Andrew Kristofic's a really talented dude. I don't think we've seen nearly the best of what Andrew Kristofic could be, in my opinion. Billy Schrouth was as a top 100 kid coming out, right? Yeah. Like he was a fantastic football player coming out.
He was borderline top 50 for my grades. Now he didn't quite get to that 4.5 star level, but he was my number 2 offensive player in the class last year behind Tobias Merriweather, to be completely honest with you, and my number 3 overall. So yeah, he was big time. Big time.
He's a really talented kid. Ty Chan, being a pure interior player, I think really fits into his profile, man, because we saw him in the fall for that one practice, and he looks the part, man. Just quite simply, like Ty Chan walks around and you're like, oh, that kid's been in the weight room for a few years at Notre Dame. And you're like, that's a freshman. Like, he's going to be a massive kid. You mentioned Charles Jagasaw getting there in June. He's another massive kid. There's a lot of talent in that room. There's no doubt. And yes, it's inexperienced talent, but if there are spots where I need to figure it out on the offensive line, it's at guard, right? There's pillars to the offensive line. You talked about bookends. That's a big pillar. That's 2 big pillars. The center is another big one. If I had to potentially replace any position on the offensive line, I would pick a guard. Guard, you could find that stability, because to your point, no matter if it's at right guard or left guard, you're going to have a pretty dang good tackle next to you, and then you're going to have a starting center that's entering now his second year. So with those things around him, I think when you look at the talent in the room, you look at what Harry Hiestand has traditionally done, and you look at just kind of all those things together, I think you feel pretty good about the guard situation, because you don't have to jump into the portal and just bring in a guy to fill a role, right? You feel good about the spot in there.
Ryan, and look, they may be wrong about this, but you and I know of some names that obviously we can't share for obvious reasons, but guys that you and I were like, I'd like to see Notre Dame go after this guy. And so I reach out to sources, and they're like, yeah, we looked at his film and we passed. You passed? We passed. And you start getting like, okay, yeah, these guys are really feeling good about their young guards and about Kristofic. Because like the thing I was basically told is a guard would have to really, like, we'll look at guards, but they'd have to really blow us away for us to go get them, because we like the guys we have. Now, that surprised me, because I would have assumed that Harry Hiestand would have been like, let me go get a veteran. And Logan Thayer had a comment in the chat, Ryan. He said basically, like, if a younger player beats out Kristofic, and I'm not predicting that's going to happen, we're just having a conversation here. If it were to happen, his point was that means that Harry thinks that guy's better right now. Because Harry Hiestand and Tom Reese is this way as well, sometimes to a fault, if we're being honest, where they're going to sacrifice future development for what's best for them to win right now. And to a degree, that's how they should be. Now, I still believe that there's a way you can develop younger players and this type of thing. But like, if they feel a younger player could be better maybe in November than Kristofic, then that kid's not going to start. The only way that kid's going to start is that they think this kid gets the best chance to win right now.
Sure.
Now, it's a show me business, right? So these kids have to go show it, but they're going to get a ton of reps in the spring. And there's going to be a fierce competition in the spring, and I'm looking forward to seeing it, because if the guard play can just be good, right, that'd be great. Just be good. This team has a chance. This team has a chance to be really good. I want to talk about some of the young guys just really real quick, Ryan.
Yep.
So with Andrew Kristofic, the thing about him is, you made a point, and I want to get to Kristofic first, but before we get to the young guys, But you made a point about Kristofic that I think needs that I want you to nuance, because I think we're on the same page here. I think Andrew Kristofic is actually has talent and as you can be better than he is. He's not a naturally powerful player. He's also not a natural butt kicker, in my opinion. And I felt like he needed someone that could kind of kick him in the pants a little bit. And so I'm very curious to see how he is in year 2 of Harry Hiestand, because we're just but there's a lot of people assuming that he's going to get beat out by a younger player this year. And it could happen, but I'm very curious to see what kind of jump he makes in year 2 of Harry Hiestand, because I've always felt like there was something holding Andrew back, because there's times when he'd look pretty good, but then he just didn't have that punch in the face like you expect from a Pittsburgh kid to have, right? I really feel like when you look at him going into year 2 of Hiestand, he's a kid that I'm very curious to see what kind of jump he can make, because yes, it's great to get the younger players going and they're very talented, but I don't think Kristofic is just a veteran guy that's holding a place. I think that kid's got some more ability. It's just about whether or not the combination of Chris Watt and Harry Hiestand can get that out of him. And if they do, I don't see how a younger guy beats him out, to be completely honest with you.
Well, I think the whole thing with Kristofic is a temperament thing, right? Like, I think he's just kind of I want to phrase this the best way I can. I think that he is a player that has lived.
It's a very mild-mannered kid.
Mild-mannered. I think he wins off of natural ability a lot, right? Because he's a good athlete. There is a reason that Andrew Kristofic was recruited as an offensive tackle originally, right? Like, he moves well. He's got a nice, a clean frame on him. I think he's one of those guys, Brian. We've talked about guys like this in the past. I think when Andrew Kristofic stops playing football, he's going to lose weight and it's gone, right? Like, he's one of those guys. So he needs to fight to keep weight on. But I do think the thing that's holding Andrew back, and we've talked about this before, is that if he played with a little more assertiveness as a football player, right, a little more aggressiveness, I think he could be a good football player. I really do, because I think that he has good foot quickness. I think he's a good athlete overall, good flexibility. If he played with a little more oomph to his game, I think he could be a starting caliber player at Notre Dame. And I think, honestly, some NFL teams would be like, oh, that's an interesting profile.
Yeah.
Like, he's a pretty long kid, good athlete, like all those types of things. I just don't think that he has a fire right now, or he hasn't had a fire. Could that change? I think it can, because Harry Hiestand, it's not just about the process for Harry Hiestand as far as like, hey, do this, right? Do that. It's the personality of Harry Hiestand that rubs off on his players as well. So he's got a lot of talent. It's just about, let's get the most out of this, man. Let's play with a little more. Let's play with a little more just juice to your game. Like, play to finish blocks. Let's take it up a notch, because there is not a lack of talent with Andrew Kristofic. He has enough talent to be a good starting player for Notre Dame on this level. He's talented. It's just about the assertiveness, I think, is the big thing for him.
Right. So, Ryan, let's move on to a couple of the younger guys. It's a big offseason. We talked a lot yesterday about like Chance Tucker and Ryan Barnes, and there's another kid in their class who's in a very similar situation when it comes to offensive line. That's Rocco Spindler. Very highly ranked kid coming out. I thought was a pretty decent athlete coming out of high school. And as you watch him now, he's 315, 320, and he just has very slow feet. And I don't know where that came from. And honestly, that's the thing that's hurt him, is he's a big, strong, physical kid. I've never heard anyone tell me he doesn't try hard. His feet are just really slow, and he doesn't move them really well. I don't know if he's too big. I don't know what the deal is. But if he doesn't kind of reach it, and he does have he's one of the few linemen that I felt had some bad weight in the midsection, right? A lot of these guys are just big. I felt like Rocco put on some bad weight. He was very top heavy a little bit, but more so that core's got some weight to it that you don't like per se, that I think slowed his feet down a little bit. He's got to reshape his body a little bit this offseason. And if he does, then he'll have a chance to, be a guy that can really make a move this year. But if Rocco doesn't step up this offseason and have a good offseason, he's going to get passed up. There's no doubt.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a vicarious position for a Rocco Spindler, because to your point, Brian, I mean, there's some talent there. It's just, for the reasons you talked about, it hasn't materialized at this point. But I mean, if you go into this battle here against guys like, I mean, Kristofic's an older player, obviously, right? He's older than Rocco. But Billy Shrouth is a year younger than Rocco Spindler. Ty Chan is a year younger than Rocco Spindler. So you're facing off against a few guys that are younger players than you. And that's the same conversation that we had about Ryan Barnes and Chance Tucker yesterday, which I know you led off with. If it doesn't happen now, it might never happen. That's the course that you might be setting for yourself. And I do think that Rocco has some traits that you look at and say, that's interesting. I would like that to be a part of the process here, right? But then if he doesn't find that niche in this year's group, I mean, only more talented kids are coming, Brian. Like we talked about Charles Jagasaw as a kid that maybe could play guard his first year or two while the other offensive tackles are playing, right? We talk about guys like Sullivan Absher coming in who could probably play inside at guard. You talk about Sam Pendleton. Like there's some good interior offensive linemen coming. Peter Jones in 2024. If Rocco doesn't make his move now, it might not happen for him. So it is a massive.
I'll go further. It probably won't happen.
Right.
Now, yeah, probably won't happen, in my opinion. Yeah. Now he's the guy that I would, if he gets in better shape and gets down to around 300 and still isn't able to beat him out, I'd honestly consider having a conversation about moving him to nose guard and letting him be just a gap eater there. He was a pretty good defensive lineman coming in high school. Some schools like them better on the defensive line. Now, he can't do that if his feet are still slow. It's just, but if he gets in better shape and he has a good offseason, but he just gets beat out by even better players, because I graded Billy Shrouth out higher than Rocco Spindler, significantly so. You know, Rocco was a 100 to 150 guy for me. Billy was a borderline top 75 guy for me, borderline top 50 guy for me. So you have that. But the point is, none of that matters if Rocco doesn't get some of that bad weight off and improve his foot quickness, because he'll battle you. That's not a question with Rocco. He'll battle you. It's just, can he move? And
he has the right demeanor. Sorry to cut you off, but I feel like if you almost took his demeanor with Andrew Kristofic's talent, you're like, that's a good football player, man. That's a really good player.
Real good. There's no doubt. There's no doubt about it. Let's talk a little bit about Billy Shrouth, Ryan, because this is a guy that a lot of people are excited about, and I'm not talking about fans. And I'm not talking about you. I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about people inside the program, defensive players. And I know what Howard Cross said before the bowl game, and I don't put a lot of stock in that stuff, to be completely honest with you, because kids say things like that all the time. And we've heard about this kid's, hard to do this. And, the DBs used to always talk about how hard Xavier Watts was to guard. Never got him on the field. Right. So we don't know how that's going to go. But the reality is, this is a really talented kid, Ryan. As I said, top 75-ish kind of guy for me coming out. 5-star upside. He's athletic. He was a pretty darn good defensive lineman as well. Was one of the few guys that actually played guard a lot in high school because of the way that their team played. Super athletic, plays with great pad level, and strong as an ox. He is the kind of kid, Ryan, that is he is the modern guard, right? Which he's big. I've been told he's up to around 310.
Wow.
Maybe more. He's just big. Talked to somebody the other day that knows him pretty well, and they say the weight that this kid has put on in the last year of muscle is impressive.
Because he was 280 something, right, when he first came in?
That's what he was. He was around 300. He was listed at 280 in high school, but he was around 300 when he showed up. But remember, he was injured last spring, so he missed all spring. But yeah, I'm told he's up well over 300 pounds now. We'll see what the official measurements are, but I've been told it's great weight. And this is by people that know football. And so when I look at him, you talk about a kid that's got all the tools of a modern guard, meaning he can play with power, and he's got the length and athleticism to pass pro. I've always felt that Billy Shrouth is a guy that could easily play right tackle. And I still believe that. Like, if there was a need at right tackle, if you were set at guard, let's just say Blake Fisher came in at Notre Dame and he was a guard, and you knew he was a guard, and there's no doubt he was a guard. And, you didn't think Tosh Baker could be that next guy at tackle, which I think he could. But just for argument's sake, I said, move Billy Shrouth out there. Let him compete at right tackle. because he's got really good length for a guy. He's a guard to me, Ryan, not because of athleticism or, because if you have to play guard because you can't move, then you're not going to be a great player. Like if you have to move from tackle to guard because you can't move, that's not a good thing. He's got the athleticism and length to me to be a tackle. The reason I view him as a guard is because his demeanor screams guard, screams big boy football, screams, I want to punch you in the face, I want to bury you, I want to crush you, I want to humiliate you in front of your mother and your girlfriend and your grandmother. Like that's how Billy Schrauth plays the game. And I think that's the thing I love about him. And kudos for Tommy Rees of being able to land him when Notre Dame didn't have an all-line coach. Because here's the deal. He did not want to play for Jeff Quinn. They were not going to get him if Jeff Quinn was still the O-line coach. And Tommy Rees stayed on him. He almost committed to Notre Dame twice, but he just did not want to play for Jeff Quinn. And as soon as Jeff Quinn was let go, it was easy. It was done. It was a done deal. And you're able to get him in. But Tommy Rees is the one that really got that one done. This kid has a ton of talent, Ryan. And he's going to be very hard to keep off the field if he can kind of take that jump technically. That's the thing that's going to hold him back. Absorbing the offense and then the technical improvement needed to really get to that level. If he can do that, then he's going to have a chance to start for Notre Dame this year. There's no doubt about it. And he'll have his first-year starter lumps, but he's going to have a chance to be a really good player at Notre Dame.
I remember how excited I was when they got Billy Schrauth, because obviously I wasn't covering anything. I just remember that class, there was like a crazy amount of Wisconsin offensive linemen that year, right? And it was just like Billy Schrauth was kind of the guy, though, that everyone was talking about the most. And I agree with everything that you said, Brian, as far as the tenacity he plays with. He's a good athlete. Like he's just got a really good baseline for being a really good football player, And I think that he brings that Midwestern demeanor, right? Like he's a tough physical kid. That's why most of these schools like the Notre Dames, the Michigans, even the Ohio States to a degree, they don't stray outside of the Midwest much for offensive linemen, because why would you? That's where they're born. That's where they're bred. That's where they're developed, And I think that he is a perfect example for that. So, and I think that with how Harry Hiestand wants to play offensive line at the Notre Dame level, that's the guy you need, right?
No
Blake
question.
Fisher's nasty, right? He's a nasty kid. Zeke Correll's got a little bit of nastiness to him. Billy Schrauth has a lot of it. Joe Walt has some of it. You're still trying to get even more out of him as he gets physically more developed.
Which
but I think
I'm honestly okay not having that from a left tackle.
Sure.
And I always thought that was a little bit of Mike McGlinchey's problem. He would overextend himself because he was a right tackle mentality. Joe Walt has a left tackle. I want left tackle and then killers, right? Yep. Like I want my left tackle to be a little bit calm and methodical.
We call it positional blocking, right? Like you want to get him in the right spot and be a little bit more of an athletic approach, which nothing wrong with that, man. Nothing wrong with that at all.
Let's talk about Ty Chan a little bit. This is an interesting kid, Ryan, because when Notre Dame first got him, he had one of the craziest sort of body transformations I've seen from an offensive lineman. A guy who was an offensive lineman. Obviously, Joe Walt had his, but Ty Chan as a sophomore was like 250, 260 pounds. He was really skinny. He was very long and broad, though. And then didn't play as a junior because of COVID.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden comes out as a senior and he's like 300 plus pounds and he doesn't look like the same kid. I'm like, did I watch the right film? Like I literally had to go back and look at his film to make sure I was watching the right kid. Cause like this kid doesn't look anything like the kid I saw because his junior year was the COVID year. So he missed that year. So then he comes out as a senior and he's this big physical kid. Now, when they signed him, you thought tackle because he was long and a little skinny. But then you saw him as a senior and you're like, maybe he could be a right tackle, but this is a kid that's a guard. This is a mauler. And you talk about kids playing with the proper disposition and the proper demeanor. That's Ty Chan. I mean, he is a big, thick, broad-shouldered. If you go back and like watch the senior film, like the first clip of his film, he literally drives a guy. He blindsides a guy, right? You remember that show in the blind side, yep. and where they took that kid, and he drove him into the end zone and like kind of flipped him over the rails.
It was time for him to go home.
Yes,
yeah.
Ty Chan's first clip in his high school film was like that. If you go back and watch it, where he literally takes a kid, drives him. They're at like the 5-yard line, something like that. And he takes a kid and he drives him into the back of the end zone and then pancakes him. Like drives him not like in the back of the end zone, out the back of the end zone, and throws him past the I'm drawing a blank here, right? The goalposts.
The goalpost.
and just, you're like, whoa, you're like, this kid's kind of mean. And I say that as a good thing. So, Tai Chan's not a guy that gets talked about a ton. And for me, my concern with Tai Chan as a senior was this. I thought the big weight jump slowed his feet down. And that was kind of my big concern. He's got the size, he's got the weight, he's got the power, but his feet weren't always great. And so for me, that's going to be a big thing for me is he is actually a pretty athletic kid when he's moving right. That's going to be the thing for me is if he gets his feet right and his footwork right, then I think this kid could be a really good player. But we didn't see him last year. So we haven't really seen Tai since the senior year. Because I keep forgetting. He was he in. I can't remember if he's an early. I always forget.
He wasn't. You looked it up last time. He was not. He was a June enrollee.
So
yeah.
Okay. So, but he's a kid that you look at and say, boy, this kid's got a chance to be a really good player if he can get his feet right. And that's going to be the key. If he can get his feet right and absorb the offense, which is true for every young kid, Ryan, he's got all the makings of a guy you want because he's not super long. He's broad, but he's not super long. But you watch him on even defense, Ryan. You're like, this kid's a big physical, short area guy that you get him away from tackle and get him more in a tight spot. This guy's game is going to take off, and that's kind of what I am curious to see if he's able to make that jump here this spring.
I remember when he committed to Notre Dame, or maybe it was a little bit after that. I didn't even watch any film on him, Brian. I saw a picture of him where he was like swimming in his jersey, like he wasn't filling it out at all. I was like, oh, that's an offensive tackle. That I remember hearing may have been you at the time before I was on the part of Irish Breakdown, where you said that like he just gained this massive amount of weight, and I was like, I was just like picturing that picture in my head. I'm like, really? Like he looked like a true tackle to me,
Mm-hmm.
And then you see him in person like we did last fall, like I did and Sean Davis did last fall. And the kid's massive, man. Like he looks like one of their bigger offensive linemen. I mean, you said he could be 320 plus this year.
He's in that first group of guys off the bus thing.
Yes.
That's what he is. Yes. He's that you get him first guy off the bus is him with a group of guys. And there's no doubt. There's no doubt. So, Ryan, to me, those two guys are two guys I'm very curious about to see how they perform this year and battle this year. There's guys like Michael Carmody. Can he get his weight back up? Could he maybe potentially battle there? I've heard the staff is very high on Ashton Craig as a young player, although I think center is kind of where they still view him as of right now. But look, if he's one of your best five, then you figure out a way to get him out there. He's another guy that I look at as potentially in that conversation. Then, of course, Charles Jagasol is going to have a chance. And a guy that I'm very curious to see perform this spring. And I normally don't look at freshmen unless they're just freaks, which is what, if we're being honest, that's what Charles Jagasol is. He's a freak. Yes, but I'm very curious to see what Sam Pendleton does this spring, how quickly he can pick up the offense, because he's already going to be big enough to play as a freshman. And he's going to be – I'd be shocked if he's not the strongest freshman they have when it comes to weight room strength. He's a guy that I'm curious to see, can he push his way into the depth chart? And at the very least, even if he's not, because I don't expect Sam Pendleton to play as a freshman, but he's one of those freshmen that to me kind of has that demeanor where you're like, hey, bro, you better bring it today because I am. Right. And that's where that depth comes from. Where you're like, hey, look, Billy and Ty, you guys are looking at what's in front of you, but you need to also make sure you're looking at what's behind you, because this cat's coming as well. And I think Sam's the only early enrollee of the 5 offensive linemen from last year. Yep. And so he's a guy that I think is going to push people as well. Again, I'm not pushing him so much from a standpoint of, is he going to start? I'm not saying that. I'd be shocked if Sam Pendleton starts this year, but more of a, does he come in and quickly adjust enough to where he can at least make you sweat a little bit to where you better bring your stuff today or this kid's going to beat you out. And so, but again, it speaks to the confidence I have. They're recruiting interior of the offensive line incredibly well. As we look into the future, Ryan, that's one of my remaining concerns about the future of the offensive line is the tackle future still a little bit of a question mark for me.
Sure.
You had one tackle, really pure tackle in this last year's class, and that's Charles Jagasaw. And even he may end up be starting a guard this next year if he's able to come in and play. Then you look at it and you say Emil Wagner has the tools to be an elite guard in every area except, or elite tackle in every area except for one. And that one area is, can he hold up size-wise? I mean, you even saw pictures of him in the bowl game, and you're like, that kid does not look like anyone else on that group. He looks like a tight end snuck into the photo with the offensive line. And that's in January. It's in late December in the bowl game.
Yeah.
So length, check. Athleticism, check. Toughness, check. Football IQ, check. All those things, from what I'm told, check the boxes. It's just you can't be 275 and playing offensive tackle in college football today. You just can't.
Not at Notre Dame.
So, yes, I'm very curious to see what he looks like this spring. That's a question mark for me, because if Emil can put on the weight and still be athletic, he's got a chance to be special down the road. Yeah. He's your replacement potentially for Joe Alt when he leaves for the NFL. After that, you've got potentially Jagasaw, but that's where the 24 class has to strike it big, Ryan. They have to get some tackles in this class, because right now the future at offensive tackle is you're hoping you can keep Tosh Baker for a 6th year or a 5th year, right? Sure. 6th year, maybe, right? And you hope Emil Wagner can put some weight on. After that, there's not a lot of options of guys you just know can be tackles. I think that's the one area where this roster is thin, and that's what Harry Hiestand inherited, and that's an area he's going to have to fix when he gets out on the recruiting trail in 2024 cycle.
Well, we talked about that a lot for 2023, is that we know that there's going to be, there's going to be some potential with Sullivan Absher getting a shot at offensive tackle, right? Like, we know that's going to happen, but I mean, especially after seeing him in person, you know that we've talked, and I think we were pretty much on the same page, right? Like, maybe he could play right tackle, but he's probably a really good guard, right? Like, that's probably
question
the conversation.
Mark at right tackle, because we've never seen him pass block, and the only time we did see him pass block, he struggled because he's never pass blocked before, 100%. Right? So it's a question mark, yeah.
That was the only miss I thought in the offensive line class, in my opinion, was that you didn't get another true offensive tackle type, right? Like, you didn't get that Monroe Freeling type. You didn't get, somebody in that vein that could 100% stick on the outside. That's the question. So when you look at that, I mean, yeah, it's a real concern. I mean, because you have Tosh, Tosh has great tools, right? But is he going to be patient enough to stay for a 6 year? That's a great question. Can Emil hold that weight? Charles, if he's a butt kicker at guard, do you want to move him, right? I mean, like, there's a lot of things I think that are to be determined of that group. There's a lot of talent. There's no doubt about it. But I still think the fit conversation is something that needs to be worked out a little bit more, because you don't 100% know. Because, I mean, even some of the guys that you have trotted out at offensive tackle, and I think like Michael Carmody is just a better interior player, in my opinion. Like, I just don't think he's a tackle at this level. So where are the answers? I don't think we know. For 2023, your answers are easy at offensive tackle. But for beyond that, to continue the pipeline that you're building, continue the development that you are building, you need to figure out that next step, obviously, of the roster construction as well.
So I wasn't talking yet. I knew I was ready. I knew I hadn't gone on yet. I had to take a deep breath. I had just drank some tea and I burnt my tongue a little bit. So this is my new thing. It's trying to help me not drink Mountain Dew, is, a hot tea with honey. Ryan, I think that's the future at tackle and the future at center are the two question marks about the future. There's a lot of talent on this line. It's just about, you got to figure out where everybody's going to play. I think that's the thing. And it's a deep offensive line. There's a lot of talent there, and they're looking to add even more. They offered another offensive tackle today. Sean Davis just put it on the message board, a kid from Iowa, Grant Bricks, who's a guy that the Notre Dame staff got out and saw several times this offseason. Harry Hiestand went out there, and Tommy Reese went out there. So it's interesting, Ryan. Have you watched him yet?
Grant Bricks, he's long as anything, but he's super skinny right now. Super skinny.
So what are your thoughts about him as a player? Because I want to ask this one real fast.
Yeah, I thought he has got a really nice baseline of athleticism, and he's got length. I mean, obviously he plays with a pretty good demeanor too. Like, I think he's got a little nastiness to him, but I mean, he's a kid that is another one of those developmental kids, man. Like, he might be 260 pounds right now. Like, he is very skinny player, but he's talented for sure.
Right, but you view him as a tackle?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. This is why. This is just so ridiculous. On3 has him listed as an interior offensive lineman. Yeah. Now, what's funny is they have him ranked higher than anyone else. They have him as the number 122 player in the country.
Interesting.
247 Sports and Rivals have him as a 3-star, but they have him as an interior offensive lineman. So I'm sorry, I can't help, but these guys are just really just
there's nothing really about his game that tells me he has to play guard. So
yeah,
just my opinion though.
Yep. So I can't help myself. But anyway, Notre Dame is obviously done well with those type of Midwestern kids. You had Joe Walt from Minnesota, and you've got some success in Illinois, and so we'll see how it pans out. But they've tackles the one that, like, center to me is easier to find because you can recruit a bunch of. The last time Notre Dame played a true center, I can't even remember the last time they played a true center, meaning a guy they recruited to play center. Sam Musfer was a tackle in high school. Nick Martin was a tackle in high school. Braxton Cave was a tackle in high school.
How about oh man, I'm blanking right now. Merrill Hodges' nephew or whatever.
Yeah, but he never started at Notre Dame.
Yeah, true.
That's the thing. He never played at Notre Dame. I think you might have to go back to Jeff Fain. I think Jeff Fain was a true center in high school. I think you might have to go back that far. Potentially to find the last time they had a true center, like maybe Bob Morton. I think Bob Morton might have been a true center. He started for Charlie a couple of years. Actually started at guard, but he was a true center coming out. But that position I'm not worried about. It's finding the tackles. That's where the answers have to be moving forward. So, you think about the future of the position. I think it's in a great place. I think the present's great, but the point too is if the offensive line is as good as we think it's going to be this year, then recruiting becomes much easier. Much easier. And I think that's another reason why it's so important that they do well this year, because if this team is going to reach its potential, the offensive line has to be really good. It doesn't necessarily have to be elite. It has to at least be a top 5 to 8 group for this team to be a playoff caliber team. But if they can be elite, then I think it makes it so much easier because it takes so much of the pressure off of just everyone else around them. And just it's going to be a big thing. And I'm very curious to see what Sam Hartman looks like behind an offensive line this good.
Yes.
That's what I'm very curious to hear.
He was getting his butt kicked
in a run game like this. Oh gosh. Yes, he absolutely was. It was not. Yeah, the offensive line he played behind. The 2021 offensive line was decent. Was pretty decent.
Yeah, with Tom at left tackle, he's a good player. Zach Tom.
Yeah, it was decent, but even then, it wasn't like what he's going to play behind this year, in my opinion. It wasn't. So we'll see how it develops, Ryan. But that's kind of where I see the offensive line in the future. It is a strength of the team, and I think it's going to become an even greater strength moving forward. And that's where Notre Dame needs to be. I can't think of a great Notre Dame team that didn't have a great offensive line.
It's a requisite. It's a requisite.
Right. Yeah. That's what hurt them in 2012. They had a really good offensive line, but not a great offensive line. They were great on the left side, but center on over, not quite as good. Braxton Cave was pretty good, but he was also still coming back from that major injury he had the year before. He wasn't quite the same player. Mike Golick Jr., smart guy, try-hard guy, just not a great player. You look at Christian Lombard at right tackle. He was still young. He was still developing. You look at the 2020 team that made the playoff, good offensive line, but by the time they got to the playoff, they were so banged up, they just weren't the same offensive line they were earlier in the year.
Yep.
So 2018 team, the offensive line was, they didn't play bad against Clemson, but they weren't a great offensive line, and Clemson had a great defensive line, and they were able to put pressure on them, because I've talked a lot about that play where Ian Book, second drive of the game, he needs to climb the pocket, bang that post to Miles Boykin. It's probably 7-0 Notre Dame. But part of the reason that he needed to climb was because there was a really quick outside pressure that now the offensive tackles got on those guys, but it still got to him too quick where he couldn't just hit his drop and throw the post route. Right. And so, those are the things that you say they haven't, the great teams, the truly great teams they've have had great offensive lines. Clemson was able to win without an elite offensive line. I don't think Notre Dame can. Alabama in 2020 didn't have an elite offensive line. They don't necessarily need it. I think Notre Dame needs it to be a championship team. I could be wrong, but I think they need it. Just the nature of how they play and who they are, it needs to be there. And for the first time since 2017, I feel like Notre Dame has the pieces in place to have that kind of offensive line, in my opinion, coaching-wise and talent-wise.
Yep. No doubt, no doubt. I mean, I think that you said it perfectly, Brian. I think it's a requisite for most programs that you need a great offensive line in order to compete at that high level, but especially at Notre Dame. I mean, that's where your brand is built. And you,
You
at
need
the
a
end of the
good
day,
one. I don't think you
yes,
need an elite one. That's the difference, right? Like, I don't think LSU needed an elite offensive line in 2019. And I don't think they were an elite offensive line. They were good,
sure, yeah,
right? I think Clemson in 2016, 2018 had a good offensive line, but they were by no stretch elite. I think the last time we saw a team win a national championship with an elite offensive line was probably Georgia last year, and that's even somewhat debatable. I don't think Georgia the last 2 years has been elite. They've been pretty good. But I'm trying to think, Ryan, like 2016 Bama. Would that be the last time a team that had a really elite offensive line won a championship? No, I mean, excuse me, 2015 Bama, because that was the year they won the Joe Moore Award over Notre Dame. That was I think Notre Dame was better, but that was an elite offensive line where a team had a truly elite offensive line to win a championship. Would you pound on the table for somebody? Would you say 17 Bama had it? Maybe 17 Bama?
I need to rethink. I don't even remember exactly who was the full
I think
five on
Jonah
that
Williams
team.
was on that team. Was on that
Really
17
good
team.
player.
But 18 Clemson was not an elite offensive line.
No.
2019 LSU was not an elite offensive line. 2020 Bama was not an elite offensive line. Georgia the last 2 years maybe could be in that conversation. Last year maybe more so than this year. So that's just kind of where I'm at, Ryan, is Notre Dame needs it because they're not going to have a receiving core of Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase in that kind of thing. They're not going to have Devontae Smith and those guys at receiver.
Jalen Waddle.
Right. They're not. They need that. And then that elevates everything else around it. So that's kind of where I was coming from on that.
I get that. Clear. And especially because the pertinence of where you are regionally too, right? I mean, Notre Dame is a Midwestern power. So like what does the Midwest produce? A lot of good offensive linemen. So yeah, I think we're on the same page. It's definitely a requisite at Notre Dame. There's no doubt.
So that's going to do it for this portion of our show. We're going to be back tomorrow, Ryan, and we're going to talk about a defensive position. And what did we say yesterday? We were going to talk about the defensive line. Is that what you and I talked about? We're going to talk about defensive line tomorrow. So that should be an interesting conversation. And then on Friday, we'll have a mailbag tonight at 6 o'clock. I'm going to be joining Vince D'Addario for IB Nation Sports Talk. We're going to have our midweek mailbag there. So Vince will have me on as his co-host on the show tonight. So make sure you check that out, 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern in the IB Nation Sports Talk show. Before we go, folks, on to the mailbag, because we do have a mailbag coming up. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. Give us a 5-star review if you're listening via podcast. Make sure you check out the CFB Nation channel as well. And, of course, as always, sign up for the message board and the premium message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. And just all the different ways you can support us, the better. We greatly, greatly appreciate it. So, Ryan, it's mailbag time. We don't have a ton of questions right now. There's been a lot of really good discussion going on in the mailbag so far, but not a lot of questions.
Tommy Reese always sparks a lot of good conversation.
Yes, I know, right? There actually was it's one I didn't agree with the premise, but it was a respectful conversation, which I liked. But so if you have some questions, let us know. And yeah. So let us know what you think and what you want to ask about and what you want to talk about. So we'll get to that here in a little bit. So let's start here with Hulk Strongest. He says, "Hey Brian, I don't know the X's and O's, but even I can see they were using Chris Tyree wrong. How would Chris Tyree be effective in your opinion?" For me, it's I need to see them using him more on. You got to mix up the runs. He's not a duo guy. He's not an ISO power guy. He is an inside-outside zone counter guy. And so I think that's the big thing for me is when you're playing him, you've got to play to his strengths schematically. I think you need to mix up the inside and outside runs, as I mentioned. And then the other part, too, is using him in the pass game as a running back. I don't think that he is a guy that you're going to look at and say, line him up in the slot, let him run corner routes, let him run. He's 5'9". I don't want him running seam routes because if you miss by 3 inches, it's sailing to the safety. So there are things you can do quick game-wise, screen game-wise, crossers, things like that, wheel routes, stuff like that I think Chris Tyree could be really good at. But a lot of his best stuff is perimeter screens while out wide as part of RPOs, and then also stuff out of the backfield. I think just getting him inside out is the way to go with Chris Tyree. And what they did with him this year was slip screens and duo. Well, you've got a quarterback who's not good at throwing slip screens to a guy who's 5'9". That's not really an ideal combination. So I don't think they necessarily used him effectively. I understand why they basically viewed him as the number 3 back, and they didn't want to necessarily build the offense around number 3 back. But I think that's a mistake, because whether you view him as the number 3 back or not, he's still the most dynamic player you had on offense. Outside of him and Braden Lindsey were clearly the 2 most dynamic guys. And if you're not using that, because even though Chris Tyree didn't really have any big plays this year, Ryan, every time we ever saw a team hit them use him that way, teams reacted to it.
Yes.
Like Clemson did it. South Carolina did it. I mean, they ripped off several big plays in that game because of how the team was responding to Chris Tyree. It was nuts. It's like they're not even using that guy, and teams are still overreacting to it. If you actually started using him that way, and you're starting to do RPOs with him out wide, and you're starting to do, running back stuff where you're running inside zone where he's running a slide under route, those outside overhang defenders are going to be put in a really tough situation. Do you run with Chris Tyree on the motion going outside, or do you stay and try to handle Audric Esme or Logan Diggs on an inside zone or a duo? You start getting those guys in those binds, you're not tackling either one of those running backs if you're not fully committed to trying to step into the box and tackle those running backs. And then if they do stay in tucked inside, then you throw that sucker outside and let Chris Tyree get the ball in space.
Yes.
And, I mean, he's getting you easy 15-yard gains on those things. And so I just want to see them use him those ways and not be afraid to combo him with those other guys. And I know you love duo, and I'm not saying get rid of duo, but I am saying you need to be more diverse with what you attack people with run game wise, to the point where if you have a talented back who's not a duo guy, you can still use him. And that's the big key. And you can put him in the game for duo, but let it be out of 21 personnel and do more things that way, and use the RPO to protect the edge a little bit more than you're using right now 2 and 3 tight ends to protect the edge. That's what I would like to see them do more of.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you hit it perfectly, especially with the run game diversity, right? Like he is an outside, inside zone counter player. You want to be able to manipulate space a little bit as a runner, right? So I don't want him just run straight downhill into a massive humanity, right? Like I want to be able to make options for him. And that's what zone blocking does, right? That gives you options, and that gives you increased space. And I think in the passing game, like this is a kid that should be used in the screen game. He should be used, just getting him quick out in a flat, or hitting a quick swing to him, or the angle route that we saw against Oklahoma State, right, in the bowl game last year. Like those are the things where he is a matchup nightmare as a pass receiver against linebackers and second level defenders. Like that is not a situation you want that you want your defense to be in. So you need to evaluate and manipulate space, in my opinion, because you've seen that when you do that, Chris Tyree's made some big plays in his Notre Dame career. Just wasn't a ton of big plays this year because you just weren't using him in the way to best utilize his skill set, right? So I think in the pass game especially, I think that mixing in with Audric Estime and Logan Diggs, there could be a big impact for him. Again, working against linebackers and finding those mismatches. And then when you use him, hey, he's going to be a different style of a runner to an Audric Estime. You're going to use him more to get outside a little bit or find that cutback lane, do those types of things. But regardless, there's still a role that could be had with Chris Tyree. I have not given up on the fact that Chris Tyree could be a really successful football player for Notre Dame if used properly.
Let's go down here to our next question. We have a super chat from Robert McReynolds. He says, do y'all know what Coach Easton looks for in a recruit? Is he looking at fundamentals only, or is there more to it? Thanks, guys, and I love the service y'all provide. Go Irish. Thank you, Robert. I don't think Coach Easton cares much about fundamentals from the standpoint of, is that going to be something that makes him decide if a guy is going to come to Notre Dame or not? Anytime you have a guy that knows how to play the game fundamentally sound, you're going to like that. But if you see a guy that has the traits you're looking for, but he's not fundamentally sound, then that's what I get paid all this money to do. And in some instances, it can be a positive, because if a kid is fundamentally sound, but it's not the fundamentals you teach, then you got to break some stuff from him a little bit. And not all offensive line coaches teach things the same. I mean, even something as simple as pass set. Some teams teach that vertical pass set, and some teams teach that, more of a 45, trying to create more of a pocket there. And it's very different mentality, very different technique. It's just different. And so, remember back when people used the flipper, Ryan, you know what I mean? Like, it just, everybody's different. Everybody teaches it differently. So it's more so, here's what Coach Easton likes. He likes length. He likes guys that are long. he usually prefers tackle bodies. And if you look at some of the offensive lines he had at Notre Dame, and even some of the lines that were created by people he recruited, like the 2020 offensive line was everybody except Jarrett Patterson was a Harry Hiestand recruit. But even Jarrett Patterson was a left tackle in high school. They were all offensive tackles, either not just in high school, but early in their Notre Dame careers. The 2017 offensive line, everybody there was a tackle except at Notre Dame, except for Sam Mustipher. Sam Mustipher was a tackle in high school, though. And so he looks for those kind of guys that can play in space, that have shown they can play in space, that have the athleticism to play in space. He also likes guys that can bend. I think you look for that. You definitely likes that. And that means bending is, a lot of guys are bending over at the waist, or guys that bend at the knees, guys that can sink their butts. If you can sink your butt, Harry Hiestand's going to like you, because you can't sink your butt if you don't have flexible knees. And so he looks for that. He looks for guys that have power. He likes a power profile. Whether you're 250 pounds or 320 pounds, you got to have strong, violent hands. I think that's something Coach Hiestand looks for. He looks for guys that have a level of foot quickness, a level of agility that he can then coach the footwork aspects of it. And he looks for demeanor. He wants guys that are going to be physical finishers. That's what, you look at his first class back. They're all fine. Even Christopher Tarrick, who you and I aren't quite as high on as I think the Notre Dame coaches are, that kid is a finisher. That's the one thing you're not going to question about Christopher Tarrick. That dude is a finisher. Joe Otting, 260 pounds, finisher, right?
Yes.
They're all that way. And you're seeing the same thing in the 2024 class. Like, all those guys are finishers. And so that's the demeanor we talk about that Harry Hiestand likes. That's why we think he's going to love coaching Billy Shrout. That's why we think he's going to love coaching Ty Chan. Even though he didn't recruit those guys, he's going to love coaching them because they are finishers. Blake Fisher is a finisher. And I think those are the traits he looks for, Ryan. Anything that you would add to that as far as things that we feel that he looks for?
No, nothing to add. I would just say to harp again on the fact that you want those long body types because there's developmental potential, right? When you have a guy that maybe isn't the tallest or doesn't have incredible length, there is a cap to their development from a physical perspective because there's just less areas to put weight on, right? Like, there's just less in that regard. When you look at guys like the 2023 class, Sullivan Asher is a massive kid. Well, why is he a massive kid? Because he's got that long frame, right? Like, he's a big kid. Joe Otting is listed at 6'4" plus, and he has that frame where he's going to develop. There's a lot easier to put weight onto a 6'4" guy with pretty long arms than a 6'2" guy who doesn't have a ton of length. So I think that developmental potential is big for Harry Hiestand, and that's why I think that he really does value that offensive tackle backgrounds, because outside of just the simple fact that usually offensive tackles are better foot quickness, a little more flexible, it's also the simple fact of developmental potential. Those guys could probably add a decent amount of weight and they can become an asset at another position if they don't stick a tackle.
Let's go to these next ones here. We got a super chat down here from Michael Dunlay. Thank you very much for that, Michael. I'm going to look and see if there was a question that followed that as well. But go now down here as well, Ryan. We got from Rob Osgood. Rob says, with the guards leaving, do you think the new guys coming in will be more physical? And who do you think will be the guards this year? Thanks, guys. Y'all are awesome. So we've already addressed who the guards will be. I don't think we necessarily addressed the first part. We talked about their skill set and the physicality around, but we did not discuss necessarily how that compares to last year's group.
Right.
I don't think that Jarrett Patterson and Josh Lugg lacked physicality. They were physical. They played hard. They played with a level of toughness, I should say, but they weren't really movers. And I think Josh Lugg's is partly due just all the injuries he had. I think just sapped some of that power he had early in his career. Jarrett Patterson's never been that kind of guy. He's never been a mover. Now, I thought this was probably his most effective year when it came to movement, because he was able to use both of his hands to block all the time. But even then, Ryan, he's not a guy that's just going to come in a solo block and just drive a guy down over a guy. A perfect example, the 2017 USC game. There was a play, the 80-yard touchdown run by Josh Adams. If you go watch that play, Alex Bars comes off and he steps inside because they're in an inside zone. And the tackle he's trying to block is trying to get to his B gap. And Alex Bars takes him with one hand and throws him into the A gap. And Josh Adams cuts right behind him for an 80-yard touchdown. Jarrett Patterson's not making a block. Now, there's things Jarrett can do athletically that Alex couldn't do. right? So this isn't necessarily, oh, Alex Barr is way better. It's not the point. The point is Alex could come off at 6'6", 320 pounds and take a one technique to line up inside and just drive them to the other side of the line and just open up gaping holes. And one of the things I pointed out about that 2017 offensive line that a lot of people missed is they averaged over 6 yards a carry on runs to the right side. Now, 6 yards a carry per run is really good. It's really good. And they did that on their quote unquote not dominant side, right? And I use that loosely because that side was still really good. Tommy Kramer was that way that year as well, Ryan, where he would just kind of come off and just bury people. Just to give y'all some context, the leading yard per carry team in the country in 2022 was UCLA at 6 yards a carry. Notre Dame in 2017 averaged 6.3 yards a carry. Now, they gave up a decent number of sacks that year for some different things, but like they were at like 5.9.5 on runs to the right side on my data that year. And I'm hoping to be able to break down this year's offensive line like that during the offseason at some point in time. But they had movers. Everybody on that line, for the most part, could move. This year's guards weren't movers. They were positional blockers, as you mentioned earlier. Now, will Billy Schrouth and Ty Chan and, if let's say the young guys are the guards, will they be guys that can be movers? Yeah, I think Schrouth can be. To the level he'll be as a senior, that's a question mark. I think they can. But Andrew Kristofic is going to be very similar to last year's guys. He'll play hard, he'll play tough, but he's not a mover. At least hasn't shown that yet. He's a positional blocker that can get a push, but there's a difference between getting a push and moving a guy. Getting a push is just that double team. We just kind of work a guy back. Moving a guy is what we saw when Aaron Banks and Liam Eichenberg were working on combos in 2008-20. They would just come off and just blow guys off the line, right? It's what we saw from Q and Mike McGlinchey in 2017. It's what we saw from Bars and Kramer and Bars and Hainsey, but more so when Bars and Kramer were working combos. They would blow people off the ball. These guards weren't that. And Kristofic is not that. Could Schrouth be that? Yeah, I think he can be. Especially, but where do you put him? If you put him on the right side with Blake Fisher, yeah, okay, they're going to move some people, sure, no doubt. And working combos with Zeke Correll, yeah, they're going to move some people. If you're doing it with Joe Ald at left tackle, well, we'll see, because I need to see Joe become more, because Joe's a positional blocker. Now, we started to see him get more movement late in the year, and that's why I think there's another jump there as he gets another year in the weight room, right? Is I think he has the potential to become a mover. He just isn't necessarily that guy yet.
Sure.
But I think they can be. Yeah, I think they can be.
No, I think they definitely can be. I mean, because a couple of the guys that you just mentioned there, like like in the hypothetical, if we say that it is Billy Schrouth and Ty Chan, for instance, right? Like we say it's the younger guys, those guys are physical dudes, man. Like they are going to, I mean, they might make some mistakes at times. They might get overzealous as a blocker at times, but they're going to make fast mistakes, man. And they're going to blow some dudes off the ball. There's no doubt about it. So I think that they are definitely, I mean, because you mentioned already, but Jared Patterson made his money mostly off of being a really good athlete, getting to a spot. That's awesome. Josh Lugg has a offensive tackle background where I think that's just kind of ingrained in him a little bit of like, I'm not the bendiest dude of all time. I don't play with incredible pad level consistently. I am a offensive guard that is going to be predicated on let's get to a spot, let's get our body in the right position. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's different styles of how you play. But I think Billy Schrouth definitely has more of a power profile than both those guys naturally. And I know Ty Chan has more of a power profile than those guys naturally. So that fact in, yes, I think that you definitely have it. And even if it is Andrew Kristofic at one guard and then one of those other two at the other guard, I still think you improved it because at least you have one guy that is more of the let's move the line of scrimmage type of guy than just a positional blocker. So, yeah, I agree, Rob. I think that it can definitely be more physical. Does that mean better? Not necessarily, because those are a couple of veterans versus a couple of younger guys potentially. But it can definitely get more physical, no doubt.
Here's a question here, Ryan. A couple draft questions for you. We'll get through these quick. Christopher Okiki asks, what do you guys think about Carl Brooks from Bowling Green, projected to be a second-round pick?
Well, I don't think he's going to be a second-round pick. I think that's a little too rich for me, Christopher. Like, I think he's an early day 3 type of talent because he's done he is a very intriguing player. So if you watched Bowling Green this year, I believe he wore number 11, if I remember correctly. I think that's correct. And he had like 10 sacks playing defensive end, but he was like 6'3 and a half, 290 something pounds during the season. It's like, that's not what he's going to play, right? So it was a little bit of a funky evaluation. So you saw him yesterday at the Senior Bowl. He's playing completely interior, and you saw some nice foot quickness, nice flexibility as a rusher. There's a power profile that still needs to get improved because he came in at like 303 pounds, but you can tell that it's rushed weight a little bit. He's putting a little bit more weight on that frame than what he played at this past year at Bowling Green. So I think it's developmental potential for a guy like Carl Brooks, and he's a really nice upside as an interior rusher because he has good athletic traits with his ability to have played defensive end, albeit at the MAC level, still at a very, productive rate. So as a early day three type of interior player who has some athletic traits to work with, I think that you can find a niche with Carl Brooks early on in his career, and he has some developmental potential to maybe be a starter down the road because he has some athletic traits to work with, no doubt.
Let's go to the next draft question, Ryan. We have one here. I think is it Dorian Weatherspoon is the corner, but he says, what do you guys think about the Devin Weatherspoon? What do you guys think about the corner from Illinois, projected to be a first-round pick?
He's phenomenal, man. I actually liked him before the season, Christopher, and he actually took even a bigger jump than I thought he was going to be because I don't think he is the most incredible athletes, right? Like I think that I know his size profile. He's 5'11" and some change. He's got 31 and some odd inch arms. So like the length's fine. The weight's sufficient. The weights is a little more of the talking point. He's only about 185 pounds. You can add weight, right? So he's got an okay frame, not a great frame. And I think he's a good athlete overall. I think he's going to test pretty well, but not at an elite level. But the thing about Devin Witherspoon is he is an incredibly instinctive football player. Whether he's playing from off coverage or zone, he really understands what's happening in front of him. And he is a physical as heck player, man. Like he'll come up and he'll stick you. He'll play some press at times, but the instinctual side of Devin Witherspoon is special, like absolutely special. He sees the game at such a high level. He's such a competitive player. I get like Kyle Fuller vibes when he was coming out of Virginia Tech a little bit, although I do like Witherspoon more than when Fuller was coming out, but that same style that like Virginia Tech used to play with, Brian, like back, in that era of Frank Beamer ball and Bud Foster, it was like your defensive backs need to tackle. They need to be physical. That's what Devin Witherspoon is. Super ferocious competitor, really good eyes, incredible instincts, and a good overall athlete. So I'm a big fan of Devin Witherspoon.
All right. Next one from Milton Fan 15. What coach has been the best recruiter in the last 10 years if Marcus Freeman, who was second? To me, I think it's hard for me to say Marcus Freeman because it's just been such a short period of time. I don't know if I could say a coach was. Here's the deal. There's no position on the offensive line in the last 10 years that has recruited more highly ranked 4-star top guys than Harry Hiestand on the offensive line. And I had this on the message board, and I'm going to actually try to find it while we're talking here, Ryan. But when he got rehired, and there was this notion that, he wasn't a good recruiter. And it was just such a silly, petty thing that kind of became the mantra from like the homers and the fanboys and the people that were going to do Brian Kelly's bidding when Harry Hiestand left. They just, he wasn't a great recruiter. He didn't like to recruit, blah. I don't care if he liked to recruit or not, but he was really freaking good at it. And the percentage of players he recruited that were like highly ranked players, and then the percentage of guys he recruited that became like starters and all that stuff, it's not even close. It's not even close. The only other position that comes close is tight end. But honestly, to a degree, I felt tight end recruiting was more about just Notre Dame than it was like when Scott Booker was getting good tight ends. Was it because he was a good tight end, a recruiter, or is he just, I'd say Harry Hiestand would be my number one because of the guys who were here for a long time. He'd be my number one. Who'd be my number two if you're going to look at guys that had to be here at least more than 1 or 2 years? It'd be Mike Denbrock. Mike Denbrock was an outstanding recruiter. He was not just recruiting guys at his position. He was the primary recruiter for T. Shepard, who was a top 100 corner, because back then they did a lot more regional recruiting. And so all the kids from California, he was primarily responsible for. Mike Denbrock was a really good recruiter at Notre Dame. He did a really nice job. If you just talk about if you just evaluate it, on a short-term basis, Marcus Freeman's done a phenomenal job in a short period of time. Now, we'll see if he can hold his coaches to the same level of accountability at the position he was great at. But the 2-year run they had a linebacker was outstanding, and it was primarily driven by Marcus Freeman. So he's in that conversation for guys that are, the shorter-term guys. As somebody mentioned Tommy Rees. Tommy Rees has done well recently, but he's got to have another good year of recruiting before we start putting him in that conversation, in my opinion. Like, he's doing well now, but let's pump the brakes on that just yet, because Mike Denbrock had a much longer track record of success recruiting.
Sure.
And Harry Hiestand had a much longer track record. Now, what I'll say about Coach Rees is he's trending in the right direction. But some of the early recruiting at quarterback was problematic. You can't deny that. And I'll say this, up until recently, his recruiting as a coordinator has been even better than his recruiting as a position coach, as a quarterback's coach. And I think, some of that had to do with Brian Kelly and some other type of things, but a lot of it was just as he was getting older and getting better. So I look at him and I think that he's a guy that is trending in the right direction, but I need to see a lot more from him kind of moving over these next year or so before I'm ready to really put him into that same category as a Mike Denbrock, who did that for a longer period of time, in my view.
The only correct answer is Brian Kelly. Ask every LSU fan out there, Brian.
Sure.
He's the best recruiter in America, man.
There's still plenty of Brian Kelly stands left in the Notre Dame fan base. They're not they don't yap as much as they used to, but there's still plenty of those guys that do all that. But yeah, those are the guys that I would put. I mean, Tony Alford was a really good running back. I mean, he was a really good recruiter as well. He's in the conversation.
Yeah.
Mike Mickens has done an excellent job in the last couple of years, but again, let's see a little bit longer track record with him. But he's in that conversation for me. Mike Elson had some stretches where he was a good recruiter, was never a great recruiter, and then he had some big miscues early on. I mean, Keith Gilmore might have had the best one season of recruiting I've seen.
Was he 2013 D-line?
Yeah. No, he recruited Khalid Kareem, Adio Gandiji, and had a big hand in getting Dalen Hayes. And then also, obviously, Mike Elson had a big role in getting Julian Aguara. But that was pretty good deal. The one was Tuitt and Ishak and Lynch. They weren't all recruited by the same guy.
Gotcha.
So that was the thing there. Like Tony Alford had a lot to do with getting Aaron Lynch. Mike Denbrock had a big hand in helping get Stephon Tuitt. Bob Diaco had a big hand in getting Ishak, along with the D-line coach, who was Mike Elston, was part of it too. But like they did more. It was like a lot more regional stuff back then than it was just the position coach at that time. So that's why it was a little bit different. But yeah, those are the guys to me that stand out as the top recruiters for Notre Dame over the years. So good questions. Coleman Smith said, "I'm shocked due to the depth of the room that some of the linemen didn't jump in the portal. Do you expect some to jump in after the spring?" I do expect at least one guy to jump in the portal after spring. I also think that I've said this a million times. Notre Dame's different, and fans got to stop projecting their own. I wouldn't want to stay and compete with other players who will, jump ship because things are going their way. I get that that's happening a lot of places, but you're just not going to see that as much at Notre Dame because a lot of these kids are going to say, "Dude, I'm a year away from graduating with a degree from Notre Dame. I can hold off for a year."
Sure.
And wait, especially at that position, because offensive line is also unique in that in the NFL, Ryan, it's one of the few positions left in the NFL where experience and age is valued.
Yes.
Where a lot of positions, they want that younger guy. I mean, you want a skill player being as far away from 30 as possible, right? With offensive line, they don't care as much. And so I think for an offensive lineman as well, hey, look, if I got to wait a couple years and then start 2 years as a senior and fifth-year senior, fine. That's okay. Because the NFL doesn't look at offensive line age the way that they look at. And matter of fact, they do, but they look at it completely differently. They want a grown man. They want to draft a grown man, not a guy that they got to give a first-round contract to and then take 2 years to get him physically ready to play. They want a guy that's going to come in and be a grown man and help him out right away. And that's what at least that's how I perceive it to be with that position.
No, and I would say that the development understanding of playing offensive line is a lot different too, right? Like, because to your point, you understand that typically true freshmen aren't going to be ready to play offensive line on the college level at a high level, right? Like they usually take a little bit of maturation, physical development. And then I also think you add in the fact that for me, Coleman, like they understand who Harry Heastand is, right? They understand that, is there a better developer for how good I could be than Harry Heastand? I mean, he's going to work with me, right? And I mean, it was a story that Sean Davis said about Charles Jagaso when he went to the practice, and it was like he's coaching the second team as hard as he's coaching the first team. He knows that they care about him, right? They knows that Harry Heastand and that staff care about their development. They understand that offensive linemen develop a little bit slower. They have to, from the physical side of things. And they know that they're going to be put in a great position to be successful. So I don't think that you're going to see a big max exodus of the older guys that get passed up, because they understand that they're in a pretty good situation to be with Harry Heastand. Pretty good situation.
Let's go to the next question here, Ryan. This one's more for me. It says, 99 problems BK 1. Brian, why are you quitting the Dew? And if it's because of sugar or calories, why not indulge in delicious MDM, Diet Mountain Dew, from time to time? It tastes better anyways. Number one, the notion that diet pop is better for you is so provably false. Yes, it may have fewer sugars and calories, but lowering sugar and calories without looking at all the other impact of it does not make it healthier. It just makes it lower in sugar and calories. I know what it is required to be healthy from an eating and drinking standpoint. I have just chosen not to follow those type of things, right? And so it really, for me, I'm getting to that point in that age where it's just like, if I don't make changes now, it's going to get too late. And so that's pretty much where it is, because like the reason I like Mountain Dew is I really like sweet things. I like the taste. I like sweet taste. It's just what my taste buds prefer. And Mountain Dew does that. And so I've got to find other avenues. So lately I've been drinking more tea with honey, and yes, putting honey in there adds the sugar, but it's still a much healthier beverage. And my wife is also, Ryan, she made me a smoothie. She's like, I just want you to try this. Because like, if you look at a lot of things for like good health for men my age and people trying to lose weight, and you'll see raspberries, you'll see blueberries, you'll see
for your age, what's that,
yeah.
30, 35, something like that?
There you go. Bonus time coming up. There you go, buddy. But yes, people my age in their 30s plus 15, you look at it and you say it's raspberries, it's blueberries, it's things like that. Well, I don't like those fruits. I wish I did, but I just don't like them. So what she's doing now is she's putting a banana and those fruits into a smoothie, and she's not like adding any like added, and nothing added to it, right? It's just that and milk. And she's like, just try this. And I drank it, and it's like, yes, I loved it. So she makes me like a couple of those a day, but it's really sweet, but it's natural sugar, which is still not great, but it's much better for you because it balances out, so don't eat fruit because that's sugar. I'm like, okay, it's not, you can't not have sugar at all. I mean, you need some sugar. Sugar has a purpose in your body. You just can't have too much sugar. And when you're drinking like pops and stuff, it gives you way too much sugar. And so I'm getting that natural sugar, but it's getting all the benefits of it as well. So I'm trying to do that. Drink more tea, obviously drink milk, and obviously have to drink a lot more water, just because, like I said, I want to get healthier and want to, live as long a life, not so much long life, because I don't care as much about that, but I want to live a healthy life. However much time I have, I want to have a healthy life, right? So you could be in the best shape of your life and keel over at 40 with a heart attack, especially now. So I just, although I'm not worried about that part, but yeah, I just want to live a good life and a comfortable life. And I'm starting to get to that point where it's like, yeah, things aren't that easy for me anymore. And so it's like, now's the time to do it. So that's why. And there's a lot of other things I've had to cut out, and there's a lot more things I still need to cut out, but I'm not doing a diet per se. I'm just trying to change lifestyles. So like a diet is something that you do like, hey, I'm not going to eat this and for 6 months. Well, I don't want to do that. I'm just going to change my lifestyle and, still partake in things I enjoy, but maybe just cut the portions down. But then there's some things, even though I enjoy it, it's like, this just isn't worth it. So, and my Mountain Dew is one of those things. I've always known that, but it's one thing to know it, Ryan. It's another thing to actually do it.
Yes. Well, it's like, oh yeah, don't eat that cake, but then there's cake in the fridge, right? I mean,
I love cake. We were talking this weekend, and my family members, I was in Ohio visiting my family. My grandmother turned 91 this week. She turned 91 yesterday, but we threw a party for her this weekend. And they're talking about the allergies and things they're allergic to. And somebody was like, milk. And I was like, if I couldn't eat bread and milk, I'd just be like, you know what? It's time to go home to Jesus. Like I've lived a good life. It's like something's just not worth living anymore if I can have bread and milk,
You would not like it in this household because my wife is my wife is lactose intolerant and she has a gluten intolerance as well.
That's been that way for a long time though, I would imagine, right?
The dairy part has the gluten things.
Kind of
5 years, maybe 4 or 5 years. Yeah.
Like I'm in my 40s, right? These things have been a staple for years. So I was like, it's all good. I don't need to live. I've had a good run. It's time to go home. So there's no doubt about that. Here we go from ERO 5.20. Any chance that Jim Tressel could help Coach Freeman now that he has stepped down from Youngstown State? I mean, I'm sure he'll be a mentor. That's about the only way that you really need Jim Tressel, and that was going to be true whether he was at Youngstown State or anywhere else. So I'm not really worried about that, to be honest with you. So he'll still be a mentor to him. I don't think he needs any help beyond that. I mean, I don't think you're going to hire him as like a analyst or anything like that. I don't see that being something Jim Tressel will be overly interested in. At the end of the day, he's still got to be in his own man, and he's going to learn lessons from Jim Tressel. But he can't be. Okay, I'm doing everything Coach Tressel did. Just like I'm just going to do what Coach Holtz did. You take the lessons from them and then you apply them to what you believe in.
Right.
And go about it that way. So we've had a lot of questions about the GA role and Laurinaitis. I honestly don't care who they bring. I just want somebody that's bring value. I don't care if it's a former player like Manti Te'o or some guy that we've never heard of who's just a really good up and coming coach. I really don't care. I mean, it's Manti Te'o, the next Nick Lazinski. Don't care. I just want someone that can coach and can be involved in recruiting. That's what I care about.
I think we focus a little too much on the name part of it, right? Because it's like James Laurinaitis, great player, great asset, all that great stuff. And again, the recruits that we talked to loved James Laurinaitis. I mean, I talked to Peyton Pierce right after his visit, and he was just talking about James Laurinaitis all like nonstop. But guys, I mean, the one thing is because Brian, someone brought this up on the Monday show and was like, but they're big loss, such a great recruiter, great coach. And I'm like, I don't know if James Laurinaitis is a great coach. What tells you that that's the facts? I don't think that you can conclude that from this past season, right? I mean, did the linebackers play so well that it's very obvious that James Laurinaitis is a great coach? Maybe he will be, but at the end of the day, the linebacker room was not up to par this past season from a full volume perspective, from a full scope, right? So I just want good coaching. I want good coaching, and I want some people to maybe pick up the slack on the recruiting side of things. That is their job. So Brian, you're mute. Sorry.
I saw it. I was trying to find it. We got another one here from Logan Thayer. Says, what went wrong this year with the red zone defense? Was it mostly scheme, play calling, execution, talent, or a combination? I'll just say this, Ryan, and I'll let you dive into it a little bit more specifically.
Sure.
When something like that is happening, it's never just one. When you're that bad in the red zone, it's never just coaching. It's never just talent. It's a lot of things, but I'll allow you to take a first crack at it. But I'll say, go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very frustrating thing because I sometimes that type of stuff, honestly, is very. I'm trying to think of the best word for this. Sometimes there is a little bit of luck and misfortune that happens to that type of stuff, right? Because it's such bang bang down there in the red zone. It is, but we talked about how porous the run defense was. I mean, porous the red zone defense was, and I think that some parts of it are. You needed to be better playing in condensed spaces. And I think that you lost some of your ability to be incredibly stout against the run at times, right? I think that teams ran the ball a little too well in that regard. I think that there was a lot of maturation that needs to happen this offseason from a communication perspective, from a consistent tackling perspective. There were just some easy faults to look at and say, why was the defense not as good as maybe it should have been? I mean, one, is that there is a lack of communication across the board. I don't think that that's just one person's fault. I don't think that that's just one coach's fault. I think that there was an inconsistency from just a communication process perspective. And I think that there was some areas of your game, mainly for me, the ability to run the football, that defense just did not counteract well enough. So there's a lot of different things that play into that. And some of that stuff is honestly just bad luck or misfortune. But regardless, tackling needs to be better. Need to be better and consistent in their run fits. They need to get off the field in those premier moments. Like that's what coaches and players are judged off of being their best in the high pressure situations, and they weren't good enough in that regard.
I didn't think they always used their corners well in the red zone either, Ryan. It was weird.
As far as
just how they so for example, the play where Benjamin Morrison got beat for the touchdown against Syracuse.
Yes.
The kid plays press man all game, and then you're going to back him off. At the 15-yard line. Like it just didn't make any sense. Like play him inside, force the outside go routes, and then bring your safeties down in the box. So that was one of the issues too. But I think one key that you hit on is they're not a very good run defense. I mean, they're not a bad run defense, but they're not a very good run defense. And so teams could kind of move the ball, move the chains. I think the linebacker fits against the run and their lack of discipline in the pass game also created problems that allowed teams to move the chains in that regard as well. So, but I really think it came down to their run defense. I think that was a big part of it. Is their run defense was a big problem. That was part scheme and part player because you start getting these teams inside the 10 especially, and then they'd go big and Notre Dame doesn't have a big package to counter, and that would hurt them. And, they'd shoot gaps, and there's a lot of times they made teams get to fourth down, and then they just end up punching it in. So it's not like they were just a sieve. But it's just there was a lot of things that just they would do that were kind of concerning to me that I just didn't understand. And I just felt like I feel like when you look at it, it was a lot of those different things. There was like some of the red zone stuff they did just didn't seem great. And honestly, it didn't seem like the players had a firm grasp of what they were trying to do in the red zone, to be honest.
I think there was miscommunication a lot, to be honest.
Poor preparation. Very poor preparation when it came to the red zone defense. Because you're not that bad, that long, and it's not bad luck. Yep. Right? Now, here's where the defense was good. They didn't allow a lot of red zone opportunities. But they were like, this is the thing that was bad about it, Ryan. It's not even like they were ranked low because they just happened to play a lot of really good field goal kickers this year. They were bad in red zone in every component, red zone overall, and then also red zone touchdown percentage. They ranked last in the country. 79.4% of Notre Dame's red zone trips, 34 red zone trips, ended in touchdowns. Right. So you can sit there and say, hey, look, they were 10th in the nation in fewest red zone opportunities allowed. Okay, great. But here's the problem. They were 58th in touchdowns allowed. When you're 58th in touchdowns allowed, but you're 10th in red zone opportunities, you have a horrible red zone defense. Horrible red zone defense. Yep. And that's a big problem, a very, very big problem. And I just really feel like they just were largely unprepared in the red zone. And you say, well, they did such a great job limiting them. Yeah, but it doesn't matter if once they get in there, they're just guaranteed to score a touchdown, basically.
Sure.
Right? Like that's just, that's not going to be effective. It's not going to be effective. Okay. Let's get to some more here, Ryan. We got one from D. Macic 2 says, how much does signing a guy like Gearby Lambert help with the offensive tackle position moving forward? How many additional offensive tackles do we need in this 2024 class, assuming we get Lambert? I think they're in a good place with Lambert, Ryan, but I'm not ready to assume they're going to get him just yet.
Sure.
But the people he's referring to, Gearby Lambert, the 2024 offensive tackle from Massachusetts. He's from the same high school as Boubacar Traore. So, yes, Ryan, my view is they need at least 2 pure tackles in this class. Okay. And right now they have 0.
Yep.
So even if they get Gearby Lambert, he's a pure offensive tackle, but they need at least 1 more pure tackle in the class. That's the key.
And that's exactly where I was going to go with the question is that, does Gearby Lambert help your offensive tackle room in the future? Absolutely. Very talented. 6'7", 280-something pounds out of Catholic Memorial. He's a really talented football player. But the numbers dictate that whether you think Caleb Brewer's that guy or you think another offensive tackle, Styles Prescott, whoever you end up thinking the other offensive tackle is, you need at least 2 in this class. You do. You need those body types. Because the fact of the matter is not only is your depth at the position a little bit of a question mark as far as the pure tackle conversation, it's also, Brian, you can't just sign one offensive tackle and just assume that guy's going to work out. He's going to be a dude. Could Gearby Lambert be a dude? I think so. But there's also a chance that he doesn't develop. So you need to get another guy as well, just in case that he doesn't develop. And so that you have a better margin for error to figure out the conversation.
Right.
So that's what we're looking at.
Here's my one knock, and this is true of He Stands First class, and it was true of too many of Jeff Quinn's classes. You need 2 pure tackles in every class, every single class. Because here's the deal: a pure tackle can play anywhere.
Yep.
A pure guard cannot. That's just the facts. And so you give me 5 pure tackles, and I can put a 5-man group together. Give me 5 pure center guard players, I can't put a 5-man group together that's going to be as good. That's just the reality. That's just fact. Because it's easier for a tackle type to transition inside than it is for a 6'2" short-armed guard to transition to tackle. That's just the reality of it. Yep. So they should sign 2 pure tackles in every year. Because here's the thing: a pure tackle doesn't just have to play tackle.
Sure,
that's the thing.
Like Caleb Brewer's a guy we've talked a lot about, right? Like I think that you agree that Caleb Brewer could play offensive tackle, but he could also be a really good guard, right? Like there's no doubt about it. Like
Charles Jagusah. I think Charles Jagusah could be a top 10 NFL draft pick at guard or tackle. It just depends on where he's going to figure it out. You know, we'll see how that goes. Mark E. Stewart with a question here: what would be considered realistic production from the tight end position? Can we come close to Michael Mayer's production across a couple of guys? I hope not. Honestly, that's going to sound bad, Mark, but I don't want the tight end position to be that dominant from a production standpoint, because it tells me that they're still building around it, even though they don't have a Michael Mayer type.
Right.
For me, I want to see the production be around, I'd say 50 catches and around 600 yards. 45 to 60 catches around 600 yards is kind of where I would want it to be this year, in my opinion. Yep. You look at this past year, Ryan, and let me pull it up here real quick. So you had Mayer had his 67, plus you had 3 catches from Bauman. That's 70. So you had 74 catches this year from the tight end position. Right. And your yards were way over that. So you had 809 for Mayer. You had, let's see here, you had 44 for Bauman, 39 for Evans, and then 11 for Holden Stays. You had 903 yards this year at those positions, and then you had 10 touchdowns among that group. If you give me 50 catches for 600 yards, that's a really good year at tight end. But that means 30-plus catches, 300 more yards were dispersed somewhere else. And then you'll have the additional yards that come from just throwing the ball more and throwing the ball more effectively. I think it's kind of how I see that, Ryan. So I think that's a good baseline for me. Now, if it's fewer catches and more yards, I could see that too, where it's like maybe it's 40 catches for 650 yards because there's maybe some more big plays because of different body types. Well, that could be a part of it too. But that's all. But that means you're doing that because you're really good at other places.
No doubt. And I think that supplements a little bit of that production. I mean, I think that there is a baseline that you need in that tight end room. But I mean, at the end of the day, Michael Mayer was one of the best to ever do it at your school, right? He's arguably the best tight end to ever play at Notre Dame. You shouldn't expect that production to just be easily, just sustained. Like, it's just not sustainable, in my opinion. But some of the wide receivers picking up a little bit of that production, right? Some of the running backs may be helping to solve some of those issues or some of that lack of production comparative to what you were last year. I don't think it has to look the same in order for it to be explosive and in order for it to be productive. Like, there's other ways to figure it out. And I think Notre Dame has answers. They just need to show that they can take advantage of those answers.
That's right. Let's go to the next one from David Lowe. Is the 24 class trending better or worse than 23? I have been seeing a lot of 3-star or unranked offers for 2024 lately. Is that normal? I'm still new to the recruiting. David, if you're new to recruiting, for the love of God, buddy, please listen to me. I love you, and I love that you keep taking it from me. I just, please listen to me. If you're new to recruiting, stop obsessing over stars. When Keon Keeley first committed to Notre Dame, he was a 3-star. When Kyle Hamilton first committed to Notre Dame, he was a 3-star. I could do this for 5 minutes. When Tyler Eifert signed with Notre Dame, he was a 3-star. Stop obsessing over stars, okay? Especially now because the ranking system has gotten more and more and more flawed. Number one. Number two, not every kid is being offered to be a star. Every team needs role players. Every team needs depth. Every team needs character guys. Dabo Swinney showed that, and he did 2 championships recruiting those kind of guys. By the way, when he signed Isaiah Simmons, 3-star. When Travis Etienne committed to Clemson, 3-star. Just want to point that out. So, number one, stop obsessing over stars. Stars don't define players. If you're mad that Harry Hiestand didn't recruit an offensive lineman from Indiana because he's ranked high, then maybe it kind of shows that maybe he's not as good as the ranking services think he is, because Harry Hiestand has a much longer track record of being really good at a very high success rate. I mean, look, Harry Hiestand's last full recruiting class probably is going to have all 4 of them in the NFL next year. Right? I mean, think about that. So, it's pretty good success rate. 3 of his 2014 linemen are in the NFL. And Alex Bars would be a much better NFL player today if it wasn't for that just absolutely devastating knee injury he had his last year at Notre Dame. So just stop obsessing over rankings. Understand that not every kid that's being offered is because they're going to take him tomorrow. It's about building your board.
Yeah.
And it's about getting involved with kids and expanding your list. Sometimes you offer kids to coerce a kid who's on the verge of committing to, let's get this thing done, because until you're committed, we're going to keep being over here. We're going to keep offering guys. Right. So there have been some 3-star kids that they have offered recently, Ryan, that I think, like Leonard Moore, kid from Texas. I don't give a crap what he's ranked. I don't care. I look at that kid's film and I'm telling you, that kid's a dude. That's a dude. Benjamin Morrison, when he committed to now he ended up being a consensus 4-star recruit, but I'm going to David, if you're new to recruiting, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Maybe you don't know this. When he committed to Notre Dame, Benjamin Morrison was still a 3-star. When he signed with Notre Dame, the number of recruiting services of all the major services that had him as a 4-star recruit was 0. None of them thought he was a top 300 player. None of them. Right? We thought he was. Notre Dame thought he was. Nick Saban thought he was. Jimmy Lake thought he was. So I'm begging you, dude. We can talk about stars and we can get into the, success rate of 5-star. That's all fine and dandy. We can have that conversation. I'm not saying that there isn't some merit to the star ranking. We use it in our rankings. So clearly it's not a useless system. But just stop assuming, stop leading with stars. Stop having stars being the first thing that you look at. Should be one of the last things you look at.
Yep.
When you see that Notre Dame's offered a kid, first thing you do is you go look at his offer list, because it's easy to look at. Second thing you do, David, is you look at the film. And then the last thing you do, just for S's and giggles, is to look at his ranking. That's it. And a better thing would be to do is ask us, because we'll tell you, look, there's kids. Carson Hobbs, a perfect example. Ryan, you and I have said, hey, look, Notre Dame likes him a lot, but we're not in love with him.
Right.
We're just not. So if we don't think a kid's a dude, we're not going to sit there and say, oh, all 25 kids at Notre Dame signed last year are dudes. They're going to win 3 national championships next year. That's not us. No. Right? When Ben Minich committed to Notre Dame, I was like, oh, I don't know about this one. About this one. But look what happened. He was a 3-star when he committed, but he wasn't a 3-star when he signed. Right? And I have Ohio State people telling me, I watched him play this year, and he was the best dude on the field. Keep in mind, Ohio State is a 4-star top 100 recruit playing safety right beside him. Right? So we're going to shoot you straight. And if we don't think a guy can play, we're going to tell you we don't think he can play at that level. We said it about Ben Minich. I said it about a Don Schuler. You liked the Don Schuler a lot more than I did when he first signed. When they first committed to him, I was like, he's a good high school player, but I just got to see a little bit more. And then, of course, he blew up. Yeah. So there have been, and when they got Brendan Vernon, I like Brendan Vernon a lot. I was like, he's not a 5-star top 10 guy. I'm sorry. He's not. And, so now his ranking's gone too far in the other direction, in my opinion. So look, we're going to shoot you straight, man. I promise you. We're going to be wrong. Everybody's wrong, but we're going to shoot you straight. And the person that's now in charge of doing rankings for 247, he ain't it. It's a joke. So I would just tell you, just stop obsessing over stars, because some of these 3-star unranked kids that they've offered are not 3-star unranked kids from a talent standpoint. They're just not.
Well, Brian, I always look to the DeMello Jones. He's always the guy I look back to. So I'm just like, Notre Dame offered him, and everyone at first is just like, the kid doesn't have a single star, not one. He was literally unranked on every single platform. And then you look at the offer list, you're like, but Alabama's offered him. Georgia's offered him. Ohio State's offered him. Every
Right.
school is basically offering. He's got like 30-something offers, and they're all
Right.
like high-level programs.
Right.
And then you watch the film, you're like, yeah, that's a pretty good football player, man. It's pretty good. Caleb Brewer's another one. I had somebody on this channel like 3 weeks ago that was like, oh, we can't sign Caleb Brewer. He's not good. He's a 3-star recruit.
Right.
I'm like, okay. And then I
Right.
literally said, it was on a recruiting show, Brian, and I was like, tell me what about his game you don't like?
Right.
Crickets. Oh, he's only a 3-star. Oh, okay. Tell me something about his game you don't like. The next response, he's an interior offensive lineman. I was like, maybe, but what's that based on? It's like, oh, that's
so
where
it's
he's
Quentin
listed.
Nelson.
Yeah. Well, no, but then they're like, oh, well, Caleb Brewer is listed as an interior offensive lineman on a recruiting platform. I'm like, so still nothing that you watched of
But he
him.
didn't play that. He played freaking tight end.
I know. No, man, it's just so funny. It's just so funny. I love it. I love it.
Well, when Joe
Offer
Walt
list.
signed, right?
Yeah.
Everybody thinks I was not a Jeff Quinn supporter by any stretch of imagination. But you know what I praise him like crazy for? When they got a commitment from Joe Walt. Because you could see the film like, dude, if this kid can add weight, this kid's going to be a dude. Because he is long, athletic, and he can move, and he's got hands. And then you look at the DNA, and that's before I even knew who his dad was. Right? And so, that's just the reality. If somebody asked me if I see Leonard Moore as a 5-star talent, no, I don't see him as a 5-star guy. No, he's like a top 100 to 120 guy for me. Yeah. Now, he's got a 4.5-star upside, no doubt. But even right now, I don't see him as a 5-star guy. Brandon Hillman's another one that when he committed was a 3-star guy by everybody but ESPN. ESPN is the only guy that had Brandon Hillman. Now, like 2 of them have him in the top 150.
Yes.
Right? On 3 and right. So did he all of a sudden get better because his ranking improved, or did the rankings finally catch up to how good he always was?
Right.
That's the reality.
I mean, there was a platform that ended up with like Mike Bell as the 80th player in the state of Texas this past cycle. Like
90. He was in the 90s, dude, at the end of it by On 3. In the 90s.
So bad.
So would y'all be excited about getting Peyton Pierce? Right? Well, some scouts, some people rank him as a top 100 guy. On 3 has him ranked as like in the 60s in the state of Texas.
Yeah.
So who am I supposed to believe? Notre Dame and Ohio State and teams like that, or the dude doing rankings at On 3 that doesn't think Dante Moore is one of the top 3 or 4 quarterbacks in the class? That thinks Brandon Inniss is not even one of the 90 best players in the country.
It's wild.
That thinks there's 132 players in the country better than Jason Moore. I mean, I could do this all day, and none of those guys are Notre Dame guys. Just to prove my point. Because here's the thing I will say to Notre Dame fans. If you think that a service is biased, you got to come to me with more than just what they've done to Notre Dame guys for me to really buy that there's a genuine bias there, right? And that's my point. Now, do I think some services have Notre Dame as a team that they're going to hate on? Yes, because there's business reasons to do so. Because every Notre Dame fan gets fired up, goes and reads the article, then puts it on their message board, and then everybody else clicks on the article, and Notre Dame fans get pissed off, and then they engage with you on social media, and they engage with you on your Twitter page, or they engage with you on your YouTube show. And you know what all that engagement does? Makes them money. So there's reasons for it, right? So to me, it's just kind of stop focusing on stars and just don't look at other things. Watch the film, right? Look at his offer list. All of that stuff should be taken into account. None of those things should trump another thing. They should all be part of your evaluation. And if I thought stars were utterly useless, I wouldn't use them in my ranking. They're a good tool to kind of tell people where you think a guy is and where you think a guy can be. Sure. But they should not be the trump card that so many people view them to be. That's my issue with it, to be honest with you. Yep. And also look at positions, because there's some positions where the recruiting services are all notoriously bad. Offensive line is a great example, right? And then there's other positions where, they tend to be pretty good at that. You know, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at Deuce Robinson and be like, yeah, he's pretty good. You know, like, okay. It's a little bit harder to look at Tyler Eifert and be like, okay, he's only 205 pounds now, but the frame is this, that, and the other thing. And then all of a sudden you think it doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at Michael Mayer and say that guy's going to be a dude. It takes a little bit more evaluation skill to look at Tommy Tremble and view him as a 4-star guy like we did and have him ranked high when nobody else does. Right. And so that's kind of my thing. So back to his original question, the first part of his question. Is Notre Dame trending in a better or worse place? It's definitely better right now, David, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be a better class. And here's why. You have to remember at this time last year, they didn't have their whole staff in place yet. Like Al Golden wasn't on the staff yet. Harry Hiestand was hired in like late January. I think at this point in time last year, Notre Dame wasn't really in the conversation with, like, they were on Jaden Greathouse and Braylon James, but they hadn't really made their move yet with those two guys. So it's just, it's a little bit of an apples to oranges conversation, David, to me, because they're way ahead from an engagement standpoint, but there's not as much buzz with Notre Dame right now because of the fact that Marcus Freeman's not new anymore. Yep. And there's the 9-4 season. So I don't think you can dismiss that 9-4 didn't have some level of impact. I don't think it was a huge impact, but there's some level of impact when it comes to the buzz. There's a lot of buzz about Marcus Freeman last year because he had just gotten hired at Notre Dame. So I think that they are going to have to work really hard to close on this class. But the good news is as of right now, February 1st, I think they're ahead of where they were last year in a lot of ways. And here's another area that's going to help them a ton. They've got a big-time 5-star quarterback that's already in the class, and that's going to help.
Yep.
When it's all said and done, that's going to have a big impact. And if they can stop messing around and close out on Justin Scott here over the next couple months, that's going to help too. But there's still work to be done there on that one for sure.
Yeah.
So that's to your original question. I think they're ahead of where they were last year, but it's different. It's just different. The landscape is different. The buzz is different. And here's the other thing too, is Notre Dame is being targeted for negative recruiting a lot more now than they did a year ago at this time. Because there's a lot of fear that, dude, we cannot let this dude take that step. Because if Freeman goes out there and wins, life's going to suck for us in a lot of ways. It is. I'm just, that's not me guessing. I'm telling you, that's a fact. And I've heard that from coaches, I've heard that from parents, I've heard that from analysts. From other coaches have said, dude, this guy makes you nervous because they also know he's a genuinely good dude. Kids like him, and if you can't negatively recruit against their lack of success on the field in the NFL, if you take that away from these coaches, they're effed for a lot of these kids, and including Keon Keeley. If Marcus Freeman had a track record of success and developing first-round draft picks at defensive line, there's no doubt in my mind Keon Keeley's in Notre Dame. He did not leave just because he got, NIL or whatever the case may be. Keon's focus was on, I want to do this, and that school gives me the best chance to do that. And that's really what it came down to. You take that away, and now that's negated, he's in Notre Dame.
Different conversation. Yep.
All right, here we go. We got some more here. Let's get through here, Ryan. Brian Shaw says, Brian, did you recognize technical improvement from the wide receiver core that shows a good foundation of development for Stuckey to ultimately get production out of the guys? Absolutely, Ryan. I did. Yep. Yeah, Brian Shaw, I mean, look, not from everyone. I didn't see a ton of it from Lorenzo Styles, but everybody else I did. I think that Braden Lindsey got a lot better, and not just better from last year to this year, but better from week 1 to week 12 and week 13. Yes. Dion got better. Tobias got better.
Jaden Thomas
got a ton better.
At the end of the year, man, he was breaking off some routes where you're like, okay, sir. Yeah. All right.
Where he didn't even know how to get off the line basically early in the year. I mean, he was just like little technical things he was just doing sloppy. By the end of the year, he was sharp. Just could find that spot in the zone, was getting on, knew how to stack up the seam.
He was their best route runner at the end of the year. I mean, pretty substantially. So.
No question. And that was not true the first 3 games of the year. I can promise you that.
Yep.
So, yes. Now, again, that also shows that the players are buying into it. Players have a role in that. But absolutely. Now, the question, Brian, that we have now is, can he take it to that next level?
Yep.
He got them to – they're now – football 101 for them is now in a good place. Right? It's now in a good place. Now it's kind of taking that next level. That's going to be the key. That's going to be the key, Brian.
Yep.
So very, very good question. And here's another one kind of somewhat along the same lines, and that is from Brian Shaw. He says, Rico Flores is able to get faster. Brian, I'll let you answer this one. Yep. Rico Flores is able to get faster and a bit more explosive before his injury. Do you see Bayless unlocking another level? Feels he's one of, if not the best route running freshman receivers. I definitely agree with that last part. He's got very good route running skills.
Yeah. I mean, if he's not the best route runner in the freshman class, he's number 2. I mean, pretty clear one, right? So he's a very
well. That was our debate, right, Ryan? Last week was between Rico and Jaden, and you can make a case for either, but they're both 2 of the best in the country at it.
Yep.
in our
And,
view.
and Rico's a very nuanced player. He's very advanced for his age. There's no doubt. And I mean, Brian, yeah, when you look at the junior film comparative to what his senior film was before he injured his foot, he looked a ton more explosive, in my opinion. Like, he looked a lot twitchier of an athlete. I thought he was a good athlete off a junior film. I thought he was a really good athlete based upon his senior film. Like, he took a massive step forward. And yes, with Matt Bayless, though, I mean, he's gonna add more size to his frame, which is going to allow him to be more explosive in and out of breaks. His body's going to really start to fill out. He's going to become a more sudden and explosive athlete. I think so. I think that while Rico may not have the highest upside of the wide receivers in the 2023 class, if you start to get more explosiveness on him, on top of the nuance he has to his game, he's going to be a really successful pass catcher at the next level. He's just got an advanced feel to him as a player.
I'll make a statement, Ryan. You can agree or disagree with it.
Okay.
Rico Flores probably has the lowest floor, or excuse me, the lowest ceiling of the 4 receivers signed. He has a very close second. He's a very close second when it comes to highest floor of the 2023 class.
With Greathouse.
At wide receiver, with Greathouse being number 1. And the only difference is size. I mean, Greathouse has got 25 pounds on him, and he's just going to be able to physically do things that Rico can't do. But outside of that, I think here's the thing too, he's not just great, right? He's got really, really good ball skills.
Yes.
Very strong hands, very good ball skills. So yes, I think Rico could be a player.
And he's got some swagger to him too, man, which you need at that position, which I think is an underrated aspect of Rico, is that he's a very confident kid, man, which matters. It very much matters at the next level.
Got some more questions here. Here's an interesting. Actually, you know what? I want to talk about that one last. So, Nathan, we're going to get to your one. We're going to kind of end it on that one. Archer 452, is Notre Dame done recruiting Brandon Davis Swain after the decommitment, or are they still pushing for him? Also, what is the best D-line class for 2024? Best case D-line class for 2024. Yes. Number 1, they are done recruiting Brandon Davis Swain. Yeah. Ryan, easy. Justin Scott. Yes. Owen Wafel. And by the way, Owen Wafel's grade for me skyrocketed after I broke down his junior film, by the way.
Good football player.
And then we got some intel we put on the board about his measurements when he came to Notre Dame the other day. Very long arms, and he was over 290, which is huge. And I saw him that weekend, because we were there taking pictures for the junior day.
No bad weight on him either, man. He's a weight room warrior. Like,
he's a big, broad shoulders, just a big kid. I thought he was like 270, 275. He's over 290. Yeah. And so now part of that, seeing him, was like he had a flannel shirt on. So it was really kind of hard to tell just how much that was, 275 versus 290, but he was there. So it's those two, Justin Scott, Owen Wafel. Yep. To me, I think after that, I don't know if I'm in a position yet, Ryan, where I have necessarily a best case scenario. I mean, if we're talking best case scenario, we're going to go, okay, Elijah Rushing, like guys like that. But right now, I don't know how realistic those guys are. But to me, I'll say, give me a pure nose TJ, which to me is TJ Lindsay or David Palapale, I think is how you say his name, right? Give me one of those. And then after that, you got to find some edge rushers. And right now, that's a little bit of my concern, Ryan, is I don't know who that would be. I don't know what pure edge guys that they're on right now that they have a shot at. Like, the guys that I love that would be like best case, it would be like Jay Sean Ross. It would be Elijah Rushing. It'd be, Ernest Willer. It would be guys like that. And right now, Notre Dame's not really a player for those guys. Right. So I don't really know that I have a dream class that's a realistic class right now. I think you could put like Jacob Smith in there. I know, like Ryan, you like him a lot more than I do. Yeah. I just don't know if I'm necessarily in a position where I want to take both of them right now. And that's a little bit more of my concern. I got to watch a little bit more of Jared's film. And I like Jacob, but I don't view him as like a top 50 guy. He's more of a top 100 to 125-ish guy for me, Ryan. Just a good player, don't get me wrong, but it's just, I guess part of it too is I'm just still bummed about how quickly they faded with like Rushing and Ross and those kind of guys, is a little bit kind of where I'm at on that. What's your stance on that, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a question that's been asked a ton. I've kind of just been calculating as like what positions they need to hit in the class, because there's still some uncertainty with the players. But I think you hit on a bunch of guys, obviously, right? Like Jacob and Jared Smith. TJ Lindsey's a very interesting football player that I know that the staff likes. There's a couple newer defensive linemen that have come into the fold. You mentioned David Pele. I mean, there's Logan Thomas out of Texas. That's an interesting player to kind of keep an eye on. But I would say right now you have the interior player at Owen Waitful, a guy that honestly he can play a little bit of strong side end, but he's a 3-tech nose tackle at the next level. You need Justin Scott in that class on the interior. There's no doubt about that. I think you need 2 defensive ends in this class, so a true Viper, and then in a strong side that maybe can play a little bit of another position.
Could potentially be like a Bryce Young type.
Yes,
maybe.
Exactly. And then that if you are able to push it to 5, which is what we think it could happen, like 4 to 5, if they push it to 5, I think that's more like a versatile piece a little bit, in my opinion, right? It's like maybe it's another interior guy that could play multiple spots on the interior. Maybe it's a big end that could eventually work inside to another interior player. Like I think that that's a versatile piece as number 5 for me in that class.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how it pans out because it's not. There's not. Yeah, I don't feel great about where it is right now. We got one from Coleman Smith. He says, "I know you're totally not high on Eli Holstein. He is correct. I think Eli Holstein is closer to a 3-star than a 5-star. However, what do you think about Dylan Lonergan? He's the other quarterback they signed. Here's the thing. Let's assume for a second that he's going to stick with football, just for sake of argument. Because that's my biggest issue with him is, does he stick with football? He has, to me, he's one of the 10 most talented quarterbacks in this class. And for that, in some years, that may not be the compliment that it is in the 23 class. If you're in the top 10 in the 23 class, you're a dude because you're a top 100 player. He's raw. He's a bit of a gunslinger right now, more than he is a pure quarterback, Ryan.
He's a baseball player that also happens to be a football player.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But man, the physical tools. I mean, he's got a really quick release, although it can be a tad long at times. So it's really quick. He flicks the ball with ease. Like you're like, that didn't look like it. Like it was kind of effortless. And like how that was a 25-yard route that he hit that thing on a line. He's athletic. He's mobile.
Smooth
right.
player.
Now he doesn't go past the second read. I mean, there's a lot of those things where he's really raw, but man, from just a pure talent standpoint, that kid has got big time tools, in my opinion. Big time tools.
Agree.
I just know he's going to stick to football enough. That's the only problem. So we'll have to see on that one, Ryan.
He's really good at baseball, man. He's really good baseball player.
But that's what he's got to think about. Like, do you want to be a potential big time baseball player, or do you want to be a potential first-round NFL draft pick, a quarterback? Because I think he has that type of tools. And then going to a place like Bama, it's only going to, increase his profile. Because look, if he shows up at Bama next year, this is going to sound crazy to some of y'all, but I'm telling you right now, he's going to show up at Alabama as the most talented quarterback on the roster, and it's not close. Just physically talented. Now, Ty Simpson is the opposite of Dylan Lonergan because he's a coach's kid that knows the game. I mean, that kid is smart. That kid processes, reads. He's just not a super physical talent. He's a little on the small side. He's got a good arm, but not a great arm. He's a good athlete, but not. He's Ian Book. He's a smarter version of Ian Book, is what Ty Simpson is, which is a compliment because Ian Book's lack of ability to process reads and process information was my big knock on him. Ty Simpson reminds me a lot of Ian Book, but just smarter and a coach's kid. So good player, good college player, but not an elite talent. This kid shows up as your most physically gifted player on the roster. Just, again, take the quarterback traits away, just physical tools. And I would say that's true if Bryce Young was still on the team. Just physical tools, because he's got every bit the arm strength, but he's got a much better body, much better size. But what makes Bryce Young special is not that. It's what's in here and what's in here, along with a really live arm.
No doubt.
So that kid has got big-time tools, in my opinion. Right?
He's got a whip, man. He's got a whip, and he is smooth as all heck, too. He's a really smooth customer.
Yeah, you're talking about Lonergan?
Yes.
Very
smooth.
He is absolutely.
He's like the perfect spread quarterback in today's era, man. Like he's got that whip. He can move a little bit. There's a quick twitch athleticism to him, where he can move in the pocket. Like there's a lot.
He's got the power arm to be a pro style quarterback as well, Ryan. I mean, that's a thing. Now that would take a little bit more time because that would take a lot more reading and processing. A pro-style quarterback has a lot more reads to make pre and post snap, and that would take some time. But the physical tools are there. I mean, I'd even argue he's top five, just God-given physical talent. It's just some of the other stuff is, he's a lot further behind some of those other guys in those areas, right?
That's fair.
His ceiling is much higher than Kenny Minchie's, but Kenny Minchie's floor is significantly higher than Dylan Lonergan's at this point in time, in my view.
Agree.
All right, Ryan. So let's wrap it up with this question. Okay.
Yeah.
Nathan Hill says, what were your guys' reaction to Tom Brady officially retiring?
I mean, can I start the conversation off with this? I actually do think this is a legit one this time.
That's the first thing that was my reaction. When you saw the video, Ryan, it's like, yeah, he's done.
Yeah.
You could just see it in his face. He was like, yeah, I'm done.
Last year it felt rushed. It felt like obviously the news had gotten out before he even wanted it to get out.
Right.
And it was really weird last year. It was a weird vibe.
Because I don't think he was ready. I don't think he was ready to retire. Yeah.
It did not surprise me slightly last year that he came back and played after that announcement. I was like, okay, that makes sense. I know everyone's going to joke about it. I've seen it on Twitter. My wife even texted me about it. I do think Tom Brady's done. I think he's done. I'm surprised that he is done because I thought he would come back on, in a situation and try to come out on top type of thing, right? But I think when you know. And I think the last year, especially with kind of the alienation of his family as well. I know we talked a lot about it. People have been talking about, obviously, about the separation with his wife and, all that type of stuff as well. I think it took a lot out on him this year. I think it did. So I think Tom's done. I think that, he's got a lot working for him off the field. He's going to be a commentator and do all that type of stuff, an analyst, whatever he feels like doing. There was that big deal that was kind of put out to him by, I forget if it was like ESPN or wherever it was, but I do think he's done. I think that this was how he wanted to go out. And I think when you know. And I think Tom Brady knows at this point.
I was kind of sad, honestly. I really wished he would have walked away after the Super Bowl.
Yeah, would have been more fitting for him.
It would have. I mean, you have him go out. It's just kind of like when you'd watch. There's like I remember watching Sugar Ray Leonard late in his career, and you're just like, dude, watching Evander Holyfield the last few years of his career, like, buddy, my man, come
just
on,
hang
bro.
it up, man. Yeah, just
hang it up. Like, just hang it up, man. And
because Brian, it's unfortunate, but like the last image we have of a player sticks with us sometimes,
yes,
and it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate.
It does. And you just watching him in that last game, and his offensive line's not blocking for him, and he just can't throw the ball like he used to throw the ball, and he wasn't the same guy. Look, he's still a good quarterback. I mean, the guy threw for over 4,000 yards this year.
Yeah, but
he wasn't the same guy, and it wasn't the same team. And you just kind of see him like he started. This is the first year I watched him play where he looked old. To be honest with you. Like, I understand why he didn't retire to this point in time because he's an ultra competitor. And the only reason that he has stayed as long as he did is the same reason why he was as great as he was. Because Tom Brady's not in the same universe as a guy like John Elway when it comes to just tools.
No.
Right? But he was great because he had a supreme confidence in himself, and he was one of the most competitive people you'll ever meet in your life. He's in that Larry Bird, Michael Jordan competitiveness.
You remember the first Super Bowl against the Rams where he was just like headbutting offensive linemen in the tunnel?
Yes.
It's like, that's not fake, man. It's not fake. That's legitimate. That is authentic competitiveness in his regard.
He's flat out that guy. And, just got somebody in the chat calling him overrated. Guy won 7 Super Bowls. There's nothing overrated about him. You may not like him, but the reason he was able to have the success that he had is because he is that ultra competitor, and it's hard for those guys to hang it up. And here's the difference between like Tom Brady and John Elway. John Elway retired because he felt he physically couldn't hold up anymore because of the injuries, because he played in a different era where an ACL injury was a lot more devastating to your career than it is now. Tom Brady has, with the exception of that 1 year he got his knee torn up, has been able to avoid the big injuries, and his body is still in good health, and so that competitive, he didn't have that send off. Like Peyton Manning was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't physically throw the ball anymore. John Elway was like, dude, I'm falling on the ball. I just don't have it anymore. Tom Brady never had that moment. And so I understand why it's harder for him to leave. But the reality is I just was a little saddened by it because, I mean, look, I don't particularly like him personally. There's just some things about him. The obsession with him that some people have, and all. I mean, there's just a lot of things about him that I don't particularly care for. But you also know that he was great. He was one of the best ever. Is he the GOAT? He's the greatest winner of all time. I mean, that's indisputable. 7 Super Bowls. Is he the greatest quarterback of all time? Who knows? I'll just say this: if I'm starting a team, he's not my first pick. He's not my quarterback. If I had to get stuck with him, I'd be pretty darn happy. But he's not my first. He's probably not my second or third pick either. He was in some fortunate situations, but he was a winner. But again, all the things that led to that success, Ryan, are why you knew he was going to stay too long. You just knew he was. Yeah. You hoped he wouldn't, but you knew he was. And I was kind of that's why I was hoping he left. That's why I was hoping last year was it for him, because he had such a great year last year. 5,000 yards, 43 touchdowns. He was still playing really well.
Right.
But you could even see then a little bit of the deterioration physically. And then this year, just it kind of,
Yeah. And even his down year this year is still better than a lot of guys' best years, right? It's like, I'm just glad that he didn't quite get to the Brett Favre level, right? Where you're just like, Brett, like, it's over, man. Just stop. It's not happening anymore, Like Brett Favre was a guy that just did not understand when to stop, right? And I think that Tom has a better understanding. Maybe it should have been after last year, but regardless, I mean,
to a degree, he had I think. But here's the thing: I wonder if he would have walked away if the personal stuff hadn't happened during the year. If his wife decided not to leave him, would he still have walked away? I don't know the answer to that, and unfortunately, we won't find the answer to that because you never. I don't want to wish that on anybody, but. But look, the reality is how do I feel? Whenever a guy retires, you kind of have a reflection on his career.
Yeah.
And the reality is Tom Brady's one of the best winners we've ever seen in pro football. I mean, one of the greatest winners we've ever seen.
He threw for 90,000 yards, 650 touchdowns or whatever it was, 7 Super Bowls. Like, the guys,
and you want to say, well, the Patriots were this, that, and the other thing, and I'll say, well, just look what Bill Belichick has been since Tom Brady left, and look what Tom Brady did when he left.
Exactly. Yeah.
The Patriots have pretty much been mediocre to bad since he left, and Tom Brady went to Tampa Bay and won a Super Bowl.
Just go look at Bill Belichick's record without Tom Brady, and your opinion changes a little bit. So.
Yeah, because the year that he had. The year that he had, what was it? Matt Castle took over for Brady. I mean, they still made the playoffs, but didn't they lose in the first round that year?
I don't think they made the playoffs that year. I think that was
they were 11-5. They didn't make the playoffs. It just says a lot about what year was that? Do you remember? That would be 2008. Now that you say that, Ryan, I think that you're actually correct on that. They didn't. I
think that was the only time in like 20 years the Patriots didn't make the playoffs or something like that. It was.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now. Let's look at the standings. Yeah, the Patriots did not. They went 11-5, but did not make the playoffs because they went 7-5 in their conference. The Dolphins made it that year. I mean, now you've got this year he makes the playoffs with a losing record. It just like the worst team in the playoffs in 2008 were the Chargers at 8-8. Everybody's 11-5, 11-5, 12-4, 12-4, 13-3. That was also the year that the Cardinals went to the Super Bowl with a 9-7 record.
Yeah.
So there's always been a little element ever since the wild card was, brought about. But yeah, I mean, look, Bill Belichick is great. Tom Brady's great. They were really great together, right?
Yeah, but they were the best together. Yeah,
yeah, but you don't win 6 Super Bowls just because you play in a certain franchise, which is why it's never been done before, right? And then once he went to Tampa Bay and won one, you're like, okay, that conversation's over.
It's not just the system anymore. Like,
right,
not with the system.
Yeah. Right. I mean, yeah.
Kill the system talk. The system didn't follow the Tampa Bay. Come on now.
Right. He won a Super Bowl at 43 years old with Tampa Bay. Yeah. He finished as a runner-up for the MVP award at the age of 44. He was great. What's funny is the best team he was ever on, they didn't even win a Super Bowl.
With
still the craziest thing. Yeah, it's that Randy Moss team.
Did like 50 touchdowns that year.
And 8 picks. Yeah, it was insane. Absolutely insane. So, yeah, but look, what I think is happening is I think there's some really upset feelings about Tom Brady because of the way that he was covered. Yeah, a lot of the ways that I think a lot of people didn't like Tim Tebow.
And
there's a lot of reasons why people don't like Tim Tebow, but one of them was just because we'd be watching a game between two teams that have nothing to do with Florida, and the announcer started talking about Tim Tebow.
Right.
And I think that's kind of part of it too. He was protected a lot, and that's true, but that doesn't take away from his greatness, right? It doesn't.
Also, we need to separate some people I think don't like him as a person, which fine, it's fine, but you can't project that upon him. Yeah, but I mean that doesn't make him less of a great player.
No, it doesn't at all. Yeah. All. I mean,
that's like O.J. Simpson. O.J. Simpson was a terrible person, but he was still a great football player. There's no doubt, right?
You went to the extreme on that one. Let me think of a murderer.
That's the example,
let's talk about a murderer. Yeah,
awful person, but a great player.
Right,
that's just what it is.
Right. Yep. But it still doesn't mean he wasn't a great player. You know. So anyway. That's going to do it for today's show, Ryan. I thought that was an interesting way to end on the mailbag talking about Tom Brady. Look, we got a chance to watch one of the best competitors ever play. No doubt. And as much as I disliked him, it was one of those ones where, man, I hate that guy. But then you tip your tap to just how good he was, right?
Yes.
And you could argue his first couple Super Bowls were because of how good the defense was, and that's fair. But you can't really say that about the last, 5. You know what I mean? So. But that's I hate that argument too, because that's the thing people say, well, Elway only got 2 rings because he played on great teams. Well, duh. You know what I mean? Name me a guy that's won a Super Bowl on a bad team. I mean, it doesn't happen. Yeah, of course you won a Super Bowl with a great team. That's what you do when you win Super Bowls. You're part of a great team. Yeah. Yep. So we'll see. We'll see how kind of who takes that mantle. And I think that, the NFL quarterback now in the NFL is in a weird position, Ryan, because at the top, it is special. There are some great players. And I mean, Josh Allen's got a chance to be just one of the all-time greats, has a chance to be. Pat Mahomes is already in that conversation because of the success he's had. I mean, Josh Adams put up great numbers, MVP. Pat Mahomes has the postseason success to be with. I mean, Pat Mahomes is 28?
Something like that, yeah.
And he's about to play in his third Super Bowl?
Third Super Bowl.
Third Super Bowl. Yep. Got a chance to win a second. And he's put up monster numbers. And you take away his best dynamic receiver, and what does he do? He goes back out and leads them back to the Super Bowl,
Dude, his receivers last week were Marquez Valdez-Scantling and Marcus Kemp. Yeah, that was his receivers last week.
And he was playing on a bad ankle. I mean, you're watching greatness, up and coming greatness. Joe Burrow is into that conversation now, where these guys have a chance to be all-time greats, or at least of their generation. But then after that, there's this huge cavernous gap between the two.
Chasm, yeah. Yep.
And so, that's why I'm hoping a Trevor Lawrence can emerge. I'm hoping Justin Fields breaks out, because the NFL is more fun when the quarterback play is great. I'm not talking about how they protect quarterbacks and so they're putting up numbers. There's a big difference between numbers and greatness. Kirk Cousins will have Hall of Fame numbers when he retires. He's actually, Ryan, got Hall of Fame numbers now. Yep. If you look at and you compare his numbers to the John Elways and the guys like that are Hall of Famers. I mean, Kirk Cousins has Hall of Fame numbers if you just look at it, right? I mean, the guy's got, let me look at his numbers here. He's got 37,000 passing yards, and he's only been a starter for 8 years, right? I mean, he's got 252 touchdown passes. He's 2 years away from tying John Elway in touchdown passes.
Yep.
Right? So it's not about numbers. The era in the league is where the numbers come from. It's about greatness. And you and I can watch 2 guys put up the same exact stats and say one guy is great and the other guy's a product of the system or the product of the times, right? And so it's not about numbers. I like watching greatness, and the NFL is better when there's great quarterback play. Why do people count the 80s as one of the golden eras of the NFL? It's because there was great quarterback play across the board.
Yeah.
Right? Guys that were at the bottom of the league back then would be top 10 quarterbacks now, top 15 quarterbacks now. And that's just the reality of it. And so I hope that the Justin Herberts can take that next step, that the Trevor Lawrences can take that next step to get into that echelon, which to me right now, after the last couple of years that Lamar Jackson's had, he's not in that category right now. For me, it's Burrow, Mahomes, and Allen amongst the young players. But then, Lamar get back on track. Hope Herbert can take that step. Hope Trevor Lawrence can take that step, right? Because I think the NFL will be in that. I think Burrow's deserves to be in that category now, don't you? I mean, he's had his team in the AFC Championship back-to-back years. He's beaten Josh Allen. He's 3-1 in games against Mahomes. I think he's in that conversation. He doesn't have the championship and all that, but he's per darn good quarterback. Sorry, excuse my language. But I think those are of the young guys. Those three are in a category of their own. Am I missing somebody? I wouldn't put Lamar in that category. I mean, I know he had the MVP, but 0 playoff wins, and what's he done the last couple of years? And I think he kind of
been banged up a ton. Yeah.
And then this year too, like with not traveling with your team, and like, look, bro, I know you got some contract stuff, but you're not even going to travel with the team to support your players in the playoffs. That didn't sit well with me. It really didn't sit well with me. So that's where I'm at, Ryan. I don't know what your stance is on that, but I'm nervous about the future quarterback play.
I mean, over the last few years, there's been a lot of the better quarterbacks of the last era that are starting to retire, right? I mean, you talk about Drew Brees, obviously. Philip Rivers was one a few years ago that was a really good quarterback in that era. Talk about Aaron Rodgers is declining. Matt Ryan's done. Like, there's just a bunch of the really good quarterbacks from the last era that are getting out. So you need to replenish that stock at the top. But yeah, so I agree. I think we're on the same page on that one.
Yep. So that's going to do it. All right, everybody. Thank you all so much for being with us today. Hey, folks, just like my guy Milton Fan says, smash that like button, folks. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. Give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate it. When you don't leave us a 5-star review, Ryan gets really sad. And so, do it for Ryan, people. Please do it for Ryan. Hit that like button. Just share this podcast. 5-star review. Sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. And most importantly, have a great rest of your day. You got 2 hours before me and Vince are going to get together at 6 p.m. on the IB Nation Sports Talk Show for our midweek mailbag. So for Ryan and Brian, have a great rest of your day, and thank you for joining us on the Irish Breakdown podcast.